The Apache warrior woman had lost both legs but not her will to survive. When her tribe abandoned her in a blood-soaked ravine to escape the cavalry death, seemed certain. Then a broken cowboy found her. What happened next would defy every law of the Arizona Territory and ignite a love story forged in fire scars and bullets. Stay with me until the end of this journey and comment below what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. Now let me take you back to the spring of 1881. The Arizona sun didn't forgive. It carved the land into cracked plates of rust and bone, turned creeks into memory, and made every breath feel like swallowing hot iron. Spring of 1881 came mean that year, meaner than most, and the desert sprawled endless under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. This was territory that killed the weak and tested the strong, where Apache warriors moved like shadows, and white settlers built their lives on borrowed time. Saka had known this land since before she could walk. Born under a cottonwood in the shadow of the Chiricahua Mountains, she'd learned to track deer before she learned to read white men's lies. Her mother named her Sun Woman because she came squalling into the world at high noon, fists already clenched for the fight. The name fit. By 17, Saka could outride half the men in her band. By 20, she'd killed 3 bluecoats in a canyon ambush using nothing but a knife and the element of surprise. The Apache didn't have many women warriors, not because women couldn't fight, but because the band needed them for other things. Survival wasn't just about bullets and blood. It was about food medicine children, knowledge passed down in whispers around fires. But Saka had lost her first child to fever, lost her second to a cavalry raid. After that, something in her went cold and sharp. She stopped weaving baskets and started sharpening blades. Her uncle, a war chief named Naichi, finally allowed her to ride with the warriors. "You have already bled enough for this people," he told her. "If you must bleed more, let it be standing." She stood for 3 years, fought in a dozen skirmishes, learned that white soldiers were predictable, loud, heavy, easy to outmaneuver if you knew the land, learned that survival meant being faster, quieter, willing to vanish like smoke when the odds turned bad. But on a copper-hot morning in late April, the odds turned worse than bad. It started with dust on the horizon, a patrol, maybe 20 cavalry moving fast through the valley where Saka's band had camped. The Apache were already exhausted. They'd been running for 2 weeks ever since Fort Huachuca sent out orders to pacify every band that wouldn't surrender to the reservation. Naichi made the call: fast scatter into the rocks, regroup at the sacred spring 10 miles north. Everyone knew the drill. Grab what you can carry, move silent, leave no trail. Saka was the last one up the ridge when the first rifle shot cracked the morning air. The bullet didn't hit her, but it spooked her horse, a gray mare she'd raised from a foal. The animal reared hard and Saka felt herself sliding. She tried to grab the mane, the saddle, anything. For one weightless second, she was airborne. Then gravity took over. She fell 20 feet down a rocky slope, tumbling through scrub brush and jagged stone. Her head hit something solid once, twice, and the world flashed white. When she finally stopped rolling, she was at the bottom of a narrow ravine, hidden from the trail above by an overhang of sandstone. Her body felt wrong, distant, like it belonged to someone else. She tried to sit up. That's when the pain arrived, a tidal wave of agony that started in her legs and exploded through every nerve. Saka looked down and felt her stomach lurch. Her left leg was shattered below the knee bone, jutting through skin at an angle that made her vision swim. Her right leg wasn't much better, crushed beneath a fallen boulder, bleeding slow and steady into the dirt. She didn't scream. Warriors didn't scream. But she bit down hard enough to crack a tooth, tasted copper, forced her breathing to slow. Above her, she could hear shouting soldiers calling to each other, horses stomping, the familiar chaos of men trying to organize pursuit. And farther away, fainter, the sound of her people disappearing into the mountains. Naiche would know she'd fallen. He'd seen everything, but he couldn't come back for her, not with 20 soldiers 50 yards away. The band had women, children, elders who couldn't fight. If they stopped to save one warrior, they'd lose everyone. Saka understood the math. She'd made the same cold calculations herself a dozen times. Survival of the group over survival of the individual. That was the Apache way. Still, understanding didn't make it easier. She lay in the dirt and listened to her people leave her behind. The soldiers searched for an hour. She heard their boots crunching on stone, heard them cursing the heat and the terrain. One of them came close enough that she could smell his tobacco. But the ravine was deep. The shadows thick and white men rarely looked down. They wanted the ones who ran. Eventually their voices faded. The horses moved off. Silence settled over the desert like a blanket made of heat and flies. Sokka waited until she was sure they were gone. Then she tried to move. The pain was immediate and absolute, a white-hot spike driven through her spine. She managed to drag herself 3 feet before her vision went dark at the edges. Her legs wouldn't respond. They just lay there useless and bleeding, slowly taking her life with them. She thought about her mother dead 6 years now from the white man's coughing sickness. Thought about her babies buried in places she could never visit again. Thought about Naichi's words, "If you must bleed more, let it be standing." But she wasn't standing. She was dying in the dirt like a dog, and there was no honor in it, no glory, nothing but the slow creep of darkness and the sound of her own ragged breathing. The sun climbed higher. Sokka's lips cracked. Her tongue swelled. Blood loss made her cold despite the heat, and she started to shake. She kept her eyes open as long as she could, watching a hawk circle overhead. Maybe it could sense her dying. Maybe it was already making plans. That was fine. Better to feed a hawk than rot into nothing. She didn't know she'd lost consciousness until she woke to the sound of hooves. Her first thought, the soldiers came back. Her second thought, too late, I'm already dead. But when she managed to crack her eyes open, she saw something that made no sense. A horse stood 3 feet away. Not a cavalry mount, but a working ranch horse, all muscle and dust. And sitting on that horse was a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same hard material as the land itself. Tall, lean, somewhere past 40, with a face that sun and sorrow had weathered into something beyond age. He wore a battered hat pulled low, a faded gray shirt that might have been Confederate once, and boots that had walked 1,000 miles of bad road. His eyes were the color of creek water in winter pale gray-blue, and just as cold. Wade Holt had been tracking a pair of stray cattle when he found her. He'd lost them 2 days ago in a dust storm, and his boss at the Circle K Ranch wasn't the patient type. Wade needed those cattle back or he'd be looking for new work, and at 43 years old with a burned-out past and a reputation for keeping to himself, new work didn't come easy. He'd been following tracks fresh enough to be promising when his horse stopped dead and refused to go forward. Wade knew his mount. 12-year-old bay gelding named Buck, steady as stone, didn't spook at rattlesnakes or lightning, but Buck was spooked, now ears, back nostrils flaring. That meant either a cougar or something dead. Wade pulled his rifle from its scabbard and dismounted slow. The smell hit him first, blood old and new, mixed with something worse. He approached the ravine edge, careful, expecting to find a dead deer or maybe a dead Apache. What he found was worse than dead. She was still breathing. Wade had seen bad wounds before. Gettysburg Shiloh, the long gray nightmare of the war. He'd seen men with their guts hanging out, seen arms and legs blown off by canister shot. But something about the woman lying in the ravine hit him different. Maybe it was the way she was still trying to push herself upright with arms that trembled like winter branches. Maybe it was the defiance still burning in her eyes, even as her body gave up. Maybe it was just that she reminded him of someone he'd failed to save 3 years ago when his homestead caught fire and his wife didn't make it out. He should have mounted up and ridden away. Apache warrior woman or not, was nothing but trouble. If the cavalry found out he'd helped her, they'd call him a traitor. If her people found out, they might kill him just on principle. And even if he got her back to his place, what then? She was dying. Both legs destroyed, blood loss, probably internal injuries. The kindest thing would be to put a bullet in her head and end it quick. Wade climbed down into the ravine. Up close, she looked younger than he'd thought, maybe mid-20s, with strong features and long black hair matted with dust and blood. Her clothes were practical buckskin pants, a cotton shirt, moccasins worn smooth. She had a knife on her belt, but no gun. Smart. Guns were loud, brought attention. Knives were quiet, personal, his kind of weapon. Her eyes tracked him as he approached, and he saw her hand drift toward that knife. Even now, even broken and bleeding out, she was thinking about fighting. Wade stopped 5 feet away and raised his hands, showing they were empty. "Easy," he said, voice rough from disuse. He didn't talk much these days. "Easy now?" She said something in Apache fast liquid full of consonants that clicked. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was the voice of someone telling him to go to hell. "Don't speak Apache," Wade said. He crouched down slow, keeping his movements visible. "But I can see you're hurt bad. Real bad. I can help if you let me." Her expression didn't change. She said something else shorter this time, and he was pretty sure it was a curse. Then her eyes rolled back and she slumped forward. Wade caught her before her head hit stone. She was lighter than he expected, all wire and muscle like a hunting cat. Her legs were a mess, worse up close. The left one was broken in 3 places, bone splintered and jagged. The right one was crushed, probably unsalvageable. He'd need to amputate both, and soon, before infection set in. But first he had to get her back to his cabin, and that was 4 miles of rough country. Wade was a practical man. He didn't believe in fate or divine intervention. But standing in that ravine with a dying Apache woman in his arms, he felt something shift. Maybe it was just loneliness, talking 3 years of living alone in a 1-room cabin, speaking to no one but his horse and the cattle. Maybe it was guilt over Maria's wife, whose screams he could still hear some nights when the wind blew right. Or maybe it was just that this woman had fought so hard to stay alive that it felt wrong to let her die alone in the dirt. He carried her up the slope. Buck didn't like it. The smell of blood made him dance sideways, but Wade got her draped across the saddle and secured with his rope. Then he mounted up behind her and turned toward home, leaving the cattle tracks behind. His boss could fire him. Wouldn't be the first time. Wouldn't be the last. The ride back took 3 hours. The sun was brutal, and Wade stopped twice to dribble water on the woman's lips. She didn't wake, but her breathing stayed steady. Shallow, ragged, but steady. That was something. He talked to her once, just to hear a voice, even if it was his own. "Don't know what I'm doing," he said quietly. "Don't know if I can save you, but I'm going to try. Seems like that's all we can do sometimes, just try and see what happens." She didn't answer, but somewhere deep in her unconscious mind, maybe she heard him. Maybe that made a difference. Wade's cabin sat in a shallow valley between 2 red mesas hidden from the main road by a stand of scrub oak and prickly pear. It wasn't much. 1 room, a stone fireplace, a roof that leaked when it rained, which wasn't often. But it was his. He'd built it himself after the fire needed something to do with his hands besides drink himself to death. The Circle K Ranch let him stay here rent-free as long as he worked their cattle. It was enough, barely. He carried the woman inside and laid her on his bed, the only bed a narrow rope-frame cot with a corn husk mattress. Then he stood back and assessed the situation with the cold logic of a man who'd once been a field surgeon's assistant. Both legs had to come off. No question. The left one might have been saved if he'd found her 6 hours earlier, but infection was already setting in. He could see the red streaks spreading up her thigh. The right leg was beyond hope. Crushed bone-damaged arteries, probably nerve damage that would leave it useless even if he could save it. Clean amputation was the only option. Wade had the tools. He'd kept his old Army medical kit scalpels, bone saw, tourniquets, needles for suturing. He'd used them on injured cattle more than once. Using them on a human would be different, but the principle was the same. Cut away the dead tissue. Cauterize or sew up the vessels. Keep everything clean. Hope for the best. He built up the fire until the cabin was sweltering, then set water to boil. Sterilized his instruments in the boiling water. Laid out clean cloth torn from an old shirt. Poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and drank it fast. Poured 3 more fingers and set them aside for her if she woke up. Then he positioned himself at the foot of the bed and got to work. The first cut was the hardest. After that, it was just butcher's work. He tied off the tourniquets high on each thigh, made his incisions quick and clean, sawed through bone with steady strokes. The woman didn't scream, she was too far gone for that, but her body convulsed twice hard enough that he had to hold her down with one hand while he worked with the other. Blood ran hot over his hands, soaked into the mattress, dripped onto the floor. He didn't think about it. Thinking would make him hesitate, and hesitation killed people. When both legs were off and the stumps wrapped tight in cloth, Wade sat back and wiped sweat from his forehead with a shaking hand. His shirt was drenched, his arms aching. The cabin smelled like blood and burned flesh. He'd cauterized the major vessels with a hot knife old army trick. It was done. Now came the hard part, waiting to see if she'd survive the night. He cleaned up as best he could, buried the severed limbs out behind the cabin, scrubbed the floor with sand and water, changed the dressings on her stumps. She was still unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. Her pulse was weak but present. That was all he could ask for. Wade pulled a chair next to the bed and sat down. He told himself he'd just rest for a minute, make sure she didn't stop breathing. But exhaustion caught up with him fast, and before he knew it, his eyes were closing. The last thing he saw before sleep took him was the woman's face, peaceful now, almost serene, like she'd finally stopped fighting long enough to rest. Outside, the sun set in a blaze of orange and red. Coyotes called to each other across the valley. The desert settled into its nighttime rhythms, the scratch of scorpions on stone, the whisper of wind through sage, the distant howl of something wild and lonely. Inside the cabin, two broken people slept, one from exhaustion, one from blood loss and trauma. Neither of them knew yet that their lives had just collided in a way that would change everything. The woman's name was Saka, and she had been left for dead by her tribe. The man's name was Wade Holt, and he had been dead inside for 3 years. But neither of them was dead yet. Not quite. And in the strange mathematics of survival, sometimes not quite dead was enough to build something new, something fierce and unexpected and worth fighting for, if they lived long enough to figure that out. The night passed slow. Wade woke every hour to check her pulse change, her dressings dribble water between her cracked lips. She never fully woke, but she muttered sometimes words in Apache that he couldn't understand, sounds that might have been names or prayers. Once she thrashed hard enough that he had to hold her shoulders down, whispering nonsense until she calmed. Her skin burned with fever. He kept the fire going despite the heat, knew that shock could make a person cold even in summer. Dawn came gray and quiet. Wade hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a stretch, and his body felt like it had been dragged behind a horse. But the woman was still breathing. That counted as a victory. He made coffee strong and bitter the way he liked it, and sat on the porch steps watching the sun climb over the eastern mesa. He should have felt something. Accomplishment, maybe. Pride. But all he felt was tired and numb, the same way he'd felt every morning for 3 years. Mary used to say he had a gift for healing things, animals, people, even the land itself. "You've got gentle hands for a soldier," she'd told him once, watching him splint a calf's broken leg. He'd laughed and said there was nothing gentle about war, but maybe she'd been right. Maybe that was why he'd saved the Apache woman. Not because he was brave or noble, but because fixing broken things was the only skill he had left. Inside, the woman stirred. Wade set down his coffee and went back in. She was awake, really awake this time, eyes open and alert. They were dark brown, almost black, and they fixed on him with an intensity that made him stop in the doorway. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then she spoke, voice hoarse and raw, "Kill me." English, accented but clear. Wade raised an eyebrow. "You speak English." "Kill me," she repeated. She tried to sit up, realized her legs were gone, and went very still. Her face didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, shock maybe, or the first edge of grief. She looked down at her body, at the bandaged stumps where her legs used to be, and then back at Wade. "Kill me now. I am already dead." "You're alive," Wade said flatly. He moved to the bed, knelt down to check her dressings. They were soaked through, needed changing. Infected or not, that's still to be determined. But you're alive. She grabbed his wrist, her grip weak but desperate. "You should have left me. My people. They left me. This is how warriors die. In the dirt with honor. Not like this." "Well," Wade said gently, pulling his wrist free. "I didn't leave you, and you're not dying. Not on my watch." "I have no legs." The words came out sharp, almost a shout. "I am nothing, useless. You did not save me, you cursed me." Wade was quiet for a moment, studying her. Then he said, "Maybe, but you're still breathing. That means you get to decide what comes next, not me. If you want to die, you'll have to do it yourself. I'm not helping." She stared at him, anger and despair warring in her expression. Then the anger faded, leaving only exhaustion. She slumped back against the thin pillow. "Why?" she whispered. "Why help me?" Wade stood up, went to the basin to wet a clean cloth. "Don't know," he said honestly. Seemed like the thing to do at the time. "Foolish, she murmured. Her eyes were already closing again.
Foolish white man. Yeah, Wade agreed. That's been said before. She fell back asleep. Wade changed her dressings. The wounds looked better than he'd feared, no obvious gangrene, though infection was still possible, and then went about his day. He couldn't go back to the Circle K, not yet. The woman needed constant care, and he wasn't about to leave her alone. His boss would be angry, but Wade had stopped caring about other people's anger a long time ago.
He spent the morning gathering water from the creek, chopping firewood, checking his small garden. The cabin was isolated enough that visitors were rare, but he kept his rifle close anyway. If the cavalry came looking, he didn't know what he'd do. Probably get himself arrested or shot. At this point, either option felt about the same. When he came back inside around noon, she was awake again, watching him with those dark, unreadable eyes. He brought her water, and she drank it slow, careful, like she wasn't sure it wouldn't be her last drink. "What is your name?" she asked finally. "Wade Holt." "Wade Pio," she repeated, testing the word. "I am Saka." "Saka," he said. "That's a good name. Strong." "It means nothing now." She looked down at her stumps again. "What good is strength with no legs to stand on?" "Don't know yet," Wade said, "but I reckon we'll figure it out." Over the next 3 days, they fell into a rhythm, wary and silent, but a rhythm nonetheless. Wade cared for her wounds, brought her food and water, helped her with the things she couldn't do alone. She accepted his help with visible reluctance, her pride a palpable thing that filled the small cabin like smoke. But she was practical too. She knew she needed him, at least for now. She didn't talk much. Neither did he. That suited them both. But sometimes in the long, quiet hours, she would ask him questions. Where did he come from? Why was he alone? Had he fought in the war? Wade answered what he felt like answering and ignored the rest. She did the same when he asked about her people, her life, how she'd ended up in that ravine. It was a careful dance, two strangers circling each other. Neither willing to fully commit to trust, but both too tired to keep fighting. On the 4th day, her fever broke. Wade woke to find her sitting up in bed, back straight, eyes clear. The improvement was dramatic color back in her face, strength in her voice. She looked at him and said, "You have given me your bed. Where do you sleep?" "Floor's fine," Wade said. "I've slept worse places." "This is not right. I will not take your—" "You'll take it until you're healed enough to argue about it," Wade interrupted. "Right now, arguing takes energy you don't have, so shut up and drink your water." For a second, he thought she might actually try to fight him. Then, to his surprise, she smiled just a little, just enough to soften the hard lines of her face. "You are bossy Wade Holt." "Yeah," he said. "That's also been said before." The smile faded, but something had shifted. Maybe it was just exhaustion, or maybe it was the first thread of trust being woven between them. Either way, Saka lay back down without further complaint, and Wade, for the first time in 3 years, felt something that might have been the beginning of hope. He didn't examine that feeling too closely. Hope was dangerous. Hope got you killed. But as he went about his daily work, feeding the chickens, mending fence, keeping watch, he found himself thinking about the future in a way he hadn't since Mary died. He found himself wondering what would happen when Saka was strong enough to leave, if she would leave, where she would go. He told himself it didn't matter, told himself she was just an obligation, a task to complete, nothing more. But late at night, sitting on the porch and listening to her breathe in the darkness, he knew he was lying. Something had changed the moment he'd carried her out of that ravine, something he couldn't name and didn't understand. But it was there, growing in the silence between them like a seed planted in hard soil. Whether it would bloom or wither, only time would tell. By the end of the first week, Saka could sit up without help. By the end of the second, she was demanding to do more than just lie in bed like an invalid. Wade had underestimated her. Not her strength, he'd seen that from the beginning, but her sheer stubborn refusal to accept limitation. Most people would have spent months feeling sorry for themselves after losing both legs. Saka spent exactly 3 days in self-pity, then moved on to anger, and from anger to cold determination. "I need to move," she told him one morning, her voice sharp with frustration. "This bed is a cage." Wade looked up from the leather harness he was mending. "You can't walk." "I know I cannot walk." The words came out harsh and she immediately looked away, jaw tight. When she spoke again, her voice was controlled. But I can move. I can drag myself. You can tear open your wounds and bleed out on my floor, Wade interrupted. That what you want? She glared at him, and for a moment he saw the warrior she'd been fierce, uncompromising, dangerous. Then her shoulders sagged slightly. No, but I cannot just lie here. It is not, she struggled for the English word, not right, not who I am. Wade studied her for a long moment. He understood that feeling, the need to be useful, to have purpose, to be more than just a body taking up space. After Mary died, that same restlessness had nearly driven him mad. Work was the only thing that had saved him the physical exhaustion that let him sleep without dreaming. Give me a day, he said finally. I'll figure something out. He spent that afternoon in the small shed behind the cabin working with scrap wood and old leather. His hands remembered things his mind had forgotten, carpentry skills learned from his father, who'd been a wheelwright before the war. Wade had never been as good as the old man, but he knew enough. He measured twice, cut once, sanded down rough edges until his palms were raw. What he built wasn't pretty, but it was functional. A low wooden platform with 4 small wheels salvaged from a broken cart, reinforced with crossbeams and padded with layers of folded canvas. Handles on each side so she could push herself. It looked like something between a furniture dolly and a child's wagon, and Wade wasn't sure if she'd be insulted or grateful. He brought it inside just before sunset. Sokka was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling with that empty expression he'd come to recognize, the look of someone trying not to think about everything they'd lost. When she heard him come in, she turned her head. What is that? Your freedom, Wade said. He set the contraption down beside the bed. It's rough, but it'll let you move around without tearing yourself up. You can push with your arms, steer with your weight. Won't be fast, but it's better than nothing. Sokka pushed herself up on her elbows, staring at the wooden platform. For a long moment, she didn't speak, and Wade felt suddenly uncertain. Maybe he'd overstepped. Maybe the reminder of what she'd lost was too cruel to help me, she said quietly. Wade moved to the bed. She wrapped one arm around his neck, and he lifted her carefully, mindful of her healing stumps. She was heavier than when he'd first found her, a good sign, meant she was eating, getting stronger. He lowered her onto the platform, adjusting her position until she was stable. Sokka gripped the handles, tested the wheels with a tentative push. The platform rolled forward a few inches. She pushed again harder and rolled another foot. Then she stopped and looked up at Wade, and he saw something in her face he hadn't seen before, not quite a smile, but close to it. Relief, maybe. Or hope. It is good, she said simply. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Wade said. You'll probably tip it over in the first 5 minutes. She did tip it over about 10 minutes later, trying to turn too sharply. Wade heard the crash from outside and came running, expecting blood and disaster. Instead, he found her on the floor cursing in Apache. At least he assumed it was cursing from the tone and already trying to right the platform by herself. Need help? He asked from the doorway. No, she snapped, then grudgingly, yes. He helped her back onto the platform without comment. She immediately started rolling around the cabin again, more careful this time, learning the balance and momentum. By the time night fell, she could navigate the small space with relative ease, could even turn in place by pushing one handle and pulling the other. Wade watched her from his spot by the fire, mending a torn shirt. There was something almost hypnotic about her concentration, the way she approached this new challenge with the same intensity she'd probably once brought to riding and fighting. She didn't complain, didn't ask for sympathy. She just worked at it until her arms trembled with exhaustion. You should rest, he said finally. It's late. Not tired. She lied, but she rolled back toward the bed. Getting herself from the platform to the mattress took effort and help, but she managed it with minimal assistance. Once she was settled, she looked at Wade across the dim cabin. Why do you live alone? She asked suddenly. A man like you should have a family, children. Wade's hand stilled on the shirt he was mending. Had a wife once, he said after a moment. Fire took her, 3 years back. Sokka was quiet, absorbing this. You have no other family. Brother died at Chancellorsville. Parents passed before the war. Mary was all I had. He resumed his stitching, keeping his eyes down. Turns out having nothing makes it easier to take in stray Apache warriors. Nothing left to lose. Is that what I am? Her voice carried an edge. A stray like a dog. Wade looked up, met her eyes directly. You're a survivor. Same as me. The specifics don't much matter. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Your wife. You loved her? Yeah, Wade said quietly. I did. Then you understand. Sokka settled back against the pillow. What it means to lose everything, to have the world take from you until there is nothing left. I understand, Wade agreed, but you're still here. That counts for something. Does it? The question wasn't rhetorical. She genuinely wanted to know. Wade thought about it, about the 3 years he'd spent going through the motions of living without actually being alive. About the mornings when he'd woken up disappointed to find himself still breathing. About the slow grinding realization that Mary wouldn't want him to give up, but not knowing how to do anything else. Some days it does, he said honestly. Some days it doesn't, but you keep going anyway because stopping means they win whoever or whatever took everything from you, and I'll be damned if I let them win. Sokka smiled, then faint but genuine. You are strange, Wade Holt, but not cruel, that is, rare. Yeah, well, Wade said, uncomfortable with anything resembling a compliment. Don't go spreading that around, I've got a reputation to maintain. She laughed, just a small sound, almost a breath, but it was there. Wade felt something loosen in his chest, some tension he hadn't known he was carrying. The cabin suddenly felt less like a tomb and more like what it actually was, a shelter, a place where broken things could maybe start to heal. That night, Wade gave Sokka his bed as usual and made up his bedroll on the floor. He'd gotten used to it, the hard wood, the thin blanket, the way his back ached in the mornings. But tonight, as he lay staring at the dark ceiling, he heard her voice drift down from the bed. Wade, yeah, tomorrow I want to go outside. He turned his head, could just make out her silhouette in the darkness. Outside. I have not seen the sky in 2 weeks. Not properly. I need... She struggled for the words. I need to remember that the world is bigger than this room. Wade understood that too. All right, try, he said. Tomorrow, we'll go outside. Thank you. Stop thanking me. Makes me nervous. He heard her soft laugh and then silence settled over the cabin. Outside, a nightbird called. The fire crackled low, and for the first time since he'd found her, Wade felt like maybe, just maybe, they'd both survive this. The next morning came cool and clear, the kind of spring day that made promises about summer. Wade carried Sokka outside and set her on a rolling platform in the shade of the cabin's small porch. She tilted her face up toward the sun, eyes closed, breathing deep like she was trying to inhale the whole sky. Better, Wade asked. Much better. She opened her eyes, looked out at the valley stretching before them. The red mesas, the scrub brush, the distant shimmer of heat already building. This land. It is Apache land. Used to be, Wade said carefully. Now it's complicated. It will always be Apache land, Sokka said firmly. White men can draw their lines, build their fences. Does not change what is true. This desert knows us. We know it. That is not something paper can erase. Wade didn't argue. What could he say? She was right in her way. The Apache had been here for generations before any white settler showed up, but right didn't mean much against rifles and federal policy, and they both knew it. Your tribe, Wade said, settling onto the porch step. They're probably looking for you. Sokka shook her head. No. They think I am dead. That was the plan, scatter, survive, remember. They cannot risk searching. The soldiers are everywhere now, hunting us like rabbits. So what happens when you're healed? She was quiet for a long time, watching a hawk circle overhead. I do not know, she admitted finally. I cannot ride, cannot run, cannot fight. What use is a warrior who can do none of these things? You're thinking too narrow, Wade said. Plenty of ways to be useful that don't require legs. Name one. He thought about it. You can cook once your arms get stronger. can so mend things, can teach if there's anyone to teach, can plan strategize, can tell stories keep history alive, can be dead weight, Sokka interrupted bitterly, can be a burden someone has to carry. You're not a burden, Wade said flatly. You're inconvenient, I'll give you that, but burden implies you're not worth the trouble, and I don't do things that aren't worth the trouble. She turned to look at him, something unreadable in her expression. Why do you care I am nothing to you, an enemy even? You're not my enemy, Wade said. You're just someone who got dealt a bad hand, same as me. That is not an answer. It's the only answer I've got. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the desert wake up around them. Eventually, Sokka spoke again, her voice softer. My mother used to say the world is divided into two types of people, those who help and those who harm. She said most people think they are helpers, but they are really harmers. They help only when it costs them nothing, when it makes them feel good. True helpers, she said, are those who help even when it hurts them. Wade considered this. Smart woman, your mother. She was. The white man's sickness killed her. Sokka's hands tightened on the platform handles. Smallpox. It swept through our camp like wildfire. Killed 12 people in 1 month. My mother. My babies. Her voice broke slightly. She stopped, breathed, continued. That is when I decided to fight. If the world was going to take everything from me, I would take something back. Did it help? Wade asked. The fighting? No. The admission seemed to cost her. It just made more death, more loss. But what else was there? We cannot surrender. Cannot go to the reservation and slowly starve while white agents steal our food. So we fight and die and fight again. It is all we have left. Wade thought about the war, about the years spent fighting for a cause he'd only half believed in, killing men who probably had as much right to live as he did. About the way everyone lost in war, even the winners. About how victory just meant you got to keep breathing long enough to see what you destroyed. Maybe there's another way, he said quietly. Maybe surviving is enough. Staying alive despite everything trying to kill you, that's its own kind of fight. Sokka looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, You are not like other white men I have met. That a compliment or an insult? I have not decided yet. Wade smiled despite himself. Fair enough. They stayed outside most of the morning, not talking much, just existing in the same space. Wade did small chores, splitting firewood, checking his garden cleaning tack. Sokka watched everything with sharp attention, learning his routines, mapping the space around the cabin. He could see her mind working, cataloging resources, identifying potential threats and escape routes. Warrior habits died hard. Around midday, Wade heard hoofbeats. He was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, every nerve suddenly alert. Riders meant trouble, cavalry, bounty hunters, or just curious neighbors, none of which were good options right now. Inside, he said to Sokka, already moving toward her. But she shook her head, her face calm. Too late. They have already seen us. If you hide me now, it looks suspicious. She was right, but that didn't make Wade feel any better. He positioned himself between Sokka and the approaching rider rifle held loose but ready. As the dust cleared, he recognized the horse, a big sorrel mare, and relaxed slightly. Not cavalry, just his boss from the Circle K, a hard-eyed rancher named Thomas Brennan. Brennan rode up to the cabin and sat his horse for a moment, taking in the scene, Wade with a rifle, the Apache woman on her wooden platform, the tension thick enough to cut. His face was unreadable beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Holt, he said finally. Mr. Brennan. You've been gone 2 weeks. I need those cattle. I know, Wade said. I'll get them. Just needed some time to what? Brennan's eyes flicked to Sokka. To take in strays. That's an Apache woman, Wade. You know what kind of trouble that brings? I know exactly what kind of trouble it brings, Wade said evenly. But she was dying, and I'm not the kind of man who walks away from that. Brennan was quiet for a moment, studying them both. He was a practical man, not cruel, but not sentimental either. Wade had worked for him for 2 years and learned that Brennan judged people by their work, not their words. She's the one they've been looking for, Brennan said finally. The warrior woman. Cavalry came by the ranch last week asking if anyone had seen her, said she was dangerous or renegade. They're offering money for information. Wade's grip tightened on his rifle. You planning to collect? Another long silence. Then Brennan shook his head slowly. No, but others will. You can't keep her here, Wade. Someone will talk, and when they do, the cavalry will come. And when they come, they won't just take her, they'll arrest you for harboring. Maybe worse. Then what do you suggest? Wade asked. Brennan looked at Sokka, who'd been silent throughout the exchange, her face impassive. You got people? He asked her directly. Sokka hesitated, then nodded. Yes, but far, in the mountains. Can you get word to them? Maybe. She glanced at Wade. If someone could carry a message. Brennan nodded slowly like he'd made a decision. I'll give you another week, Wade. Get her strong enough to travel, figure out a plan. But after that, I need you back at work and I need this situation resolved. Understood? Understood, yeah, Wade said. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If this goes sideways, I never saw her. Never had this conversation. Brennan gathered his reins. And Wade, those cattle better be in my pen by the end of the month, or you're fired anyway. He rode off without waiting for a response, leaving Wade and Sokka alone in the dust and silence. He is a good man, Sokka said after a moment. For a white rancher. He's practical, Wade corrected, which is sometimes better than good. We have 1 week, Sokka said. To do what? Wade sat down on the porch step, suddenly tired. Hell if I know. Get you strong enough to travel, I guess. Figure out where you can go that's safe. Send word to your people if that's possible. And if it is not possible. He looked at her straight on. Then we figure out something else. That night after Sokka was asleep, Wade sat outside under the stars and thought about the impossible situation he'd gotten himself into. He could get arrested or killed, or at minimum lose his job and his home. The smart thing would be to take Brennan's warning and cut his losses. Help Sokka get word to her people, then send her on her way. But something had shifted over these past 2 weeks. Somewhere between the amputation and the rolling platform, between the shared silence and the careful conversations, Sokka had stopped being just an obligation and become something else. Not exactly a friend, they didn't know each other well enough for that, but not a stranger either. Maybe she was right earlier when she'd said he understood loss. Maybe that understanding created its own kind of bond. Or maybe he was just lonely and foolish, projecting meaning onto someone who'd be gone the moment she could manage it. Wade had learned a long time ago that reading his own feelings was like trying to read smoke signals in a windstorm. Nothing was ever clear. Inside the cabin, Sokka turned restlessly in her sleep, murmuring something in Apache. Wade listened to the cadence of her voice, the rise and fall, the soft clicking consonants. It sounded like home must sound if you'd lost your home. It sounded like grief. He went back inside quietly and added wood to the fire. Sokka had kicked off her blanket in her sleep, and he pulled it back up to her shoulders without waking her. Her face in sleep looked younger, less guarded. He could see the woman she must have been before the war, and loss had carved hard lines around her mouth. Wade settled onto his bedroll, hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. 1 week, 7 days to figure out an impossible problem. It wasn't enough time, but then again, time was never enough for anything that mattered. He'd figure something out. He always did. And if he couldn't figure it out well, at least he'd tried. That was more than most people could say. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. Sokka insisted on doing more cooking simple meals, mending clothes, organizing the chaotic cabin into something resembling order. Wade let her understanding that she needed to feel useful. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, speaking only when necessary, learning each other's habits and boundaries. On the 3rd day, Wade started teaching her about the rolling platform's limitations, how to navigate rough ground, how to conserve her arm strength, how to fall safely if she tipped. She learned fast, adapting with that same fierce determination she brought to everything. By the 4th day, she could roll herself the 1/4 mile to the creek, though the journey left her exhausted. On the 5th day, fever returned, not as bad as before, but enough to lay her flat. Wade stayed up all night with cool compresses, monitoring her breathing, fighting the rising panic that whispered she might die anyway, that all his work had been for nothing. But dawn came, and the fever broke, and Sokka opened her eyes and said, You look terrible. You don't look so great yourself, Wade shot back relief, making him sharp. She smiled weakly. We are a pair, you and I. Two broken things holding each other up. Guess that's one way to put it, Wade agreed. On the sixth day, Sokka asked him to take her outside after dark. Wade was confused but complied, carrying her to the porch and settling her on her platform. She tilted her face up toward the night sky, toward the sweep of stars that seemed close enough to touch. When I was a child, she said quietly, my grandmother taught me the star stories. Each constellation, each pattern, they told our history, who we were, where we came from, where we would go after death. She pointed at a cluster of stars. See there, that is the basket. And there, that is the coyote. And there, her voice caught. There is the mother carrying her children. I have not seen these stories in so long. Wade looked up, seeing only stars. But through her eyes, he could almost see the patterns, the stories written in light. Tell me, he said. So she did. For an hour, she spoke about the stars, her voice soft and rhythmic, weaving stories of creation and destruction, love and loss, warriors and spirits. Wade listened without interrupting, and something about the darkness and her voice and the infinite sky made the world feel both larger and more intimate. When she finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Thank you, Wade, for letting me remember who I was before." "You're still who you were," Wade said. "Missing legs don't change that." "Do you really believe that?" He thought about it honestly. "I think you're still a warrior, just fighting a different kind of battle now." She reached out and touched his hand just briefly, just a brush of fingers. But it was the first time she'd initiated contact, and Wade felt the significance of it like a current. "Tomorrow," she said, "I will show you something, to repay your kindness." "You don't need to but—" "Yes," she interrupted firmly. "I do." The seventh day dawned bright and hot. Wade woke to find Sokka already up, already on her platform, waiting by the cabin door with an expression of determination. "Today," she announced, "you will learn Apache tracking. It is a skill every warrior knows. You should know it too." Wade raised an eyebrow. "I know tracking." "You know white man's tracking," she corrected. "Broken twigs, footprints, obvious signs. I will teach you to see what is hidden, what the land whispers instead of shouts." They spent the morning near the cabin, Sokka teaching him to read disturbances in the dust, to understand the difference between animal tracks and human, to see the tiny signs of passage that white trackers missed. She couldn't demonstrate physically, but her explanations were so clear, so precise, that Wade found himself seeing things he'd walked past 100 times without noticing. "There," she said, pointing to a spot near the creek. "Someone came through here 3 days ago, a white man walking heavy, nervous." Wade studied the ground, saw nothing. "How do you know?" "The stones are turned, just slightly. White men walk without thinking about what their feet disturb. And see how the dirt is brushed near that rock." He stumbled, caught himself. "Only nervous people stumble in daylight on flat ground." Wade looked closer, and there it was, exactly as she'd described. "I'll be damned." "You are learning," Sokka said, and there was approval in her voice. "Good. Now let me teach you about reading smoke and wind and water. These things speak too if you listen." They worked through the afternoon, Sokka sharing knowledge that her people had refined over generations. Wade absorbed it all, fascinated by the complexity of what he'd always thought was simple wilderness survival. This was something different, an entire philosophy of observation, of being present in the land, rather than just moving through it. As the sun began to set, painting the mesas in shades of copper and gold, Sokka went quiet. Wade looked over and saw her staring toward the mountains, her face unreadable. "What is it?" he asked. "Tomorrow," she said softly. "Your week is over. I must decide." "Decide what?" She turned to face him, and her eyes were dark with some emotion he couldn't name. "Whether to send word to my people and leave, or whether to ask if I can stay." Wade's heart kicked against his ribs. "Stay." "I do not know where else to go," Sokka said simply. "My tribe believes I am dead. If I return, I bring shame, a warrior who cannot fight. But here,
She gestured at the cabin the valley Wade himself. Here I am not useless. Here someone needs me, even if just a little. It's more than a little, Wade said, and meant it. Then, she hesitated, vulnerable in a way he'd never seen her. May I stay for a while longer until we both figure out what comes next? Wade should have said no. Should have explained all the ways this was dangerous and complicated and impossible. Should have been practical like Brennan, like the world demanded. But practical had never saved anyone. Practical was just another word for safe, and safe meant alone. Yeah, he said quietly. You can stay. The relief on her face was immediate and profound. She closed her eyes, breathed out slowly, and when she opened them again, something had changed. Some wall had come down. They looked at each other in the dying light, two broken survivors who'd found something neither had been looking for. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The beginning of trust that might grow into something more. Thank you, Wade Holt, Sokka said, for saving my life, and for giving me a reason to want it back. Wade didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Words felt insufficient anyway. Instead, he helped her inside as the stars began to appear one by one, ancient and eternal. And for the first time in 3 years, Wade Holt went to sleep, feeling something other than emptiness. He went to sleep feeling almost like coming home. The decision to stay changed things between them in ways neither could have predicted. It wasn't sudden, no lightning strike of recognition, no dramatic shift. Instead, it was gradual, like water wearing down stone, small moments accumulating into something solid and undeniable. Wade went back to work at the Circle K 3 days later, leaving before dawn and returning after sunset. Brennan asked no questions, just pointed him toward the cattle that needed moving and the fence that needed mending. Wade worked hard, pushed himself until his muscles screamed, partly because the work needed doing and partly because exhaustion was the only thing that shut up the voices in his head telling him he was making a terrible mistake. But every evening, when he rode back to the cabin and saw lamplight in the window, saw Sokka waiting on the porch on her platform, something in his chest loosened. She'd started greeting him with coffee. Terrible coffee, too weak, and somehow also too bitter, but she was trying, and that mattered more than the taste. They'd sit together in the cooling evening air, not talking much, just existing in each other's presence, while the desert settled into night. On the 4th evening of this new routine, Wade came home to find the cabin transformed. Sokka had somehow managed to clean everything: floors, scrubbed cobwebs, swept away his few possessions, organized into some kind of order. The place still wasn't much, but it looked lived in now, instead of just occupied. You didn't have to do all this, Wade said, looking around. Sokka shrugged from her spot by the fire. I was bored. And you live like a bear. Someone needed to fix it. I like living like a bear. Well, now you live like a bear with clean floors. You will survive the change. Wade smiled despite himself. Over the past week, Sokka's English had improved dramatically. Either she'd known more than she let on initially, or she was a remarkably fast learner. Probably both. Her sense of humor had emerged too dry and sharp, usually at his expense. He found he didn't mind. How are the wounds? He asked, setting down his rifle and hat. Healing, still angry sometimes, but better. She'd taken to changing her own dressings now, fiercely independent about anything she could manage alone. Wade had learned not to offer help unless asked. It just made her stubborn. He washed up in the basin, scrubbing away the day's dust and sweat. When he turned back, Sokka was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What? He asked. You are different than when we met, she said. Less heavy, like you were carrying stones and put some down. Wade considered this. She wasn't wrong. The crushing weight he'd carried since Mary's death hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted somehow, become bearable. He didn't wake up disappointed to be alive anymore. Maybe, he admitted, or maybe I'm just too tired to notice. It is not tiredness. It is, she searched for the word, peace. Small peace, but there. Wade sat down across from her, accepted the plate of food she'd prepared: beans and cornbread, simple but edible. They ate in comfortable silence, and he thought about her observation. Peace. He hadn't felt peaceful in years, hadn't even remembered what it felt like.
But sitting here with Sokka with the fire crackling and the night sounds outside, maybe she was right. Maybe this was what peace looked like when you'd forgotten its shape. "Can I ask you something?" Sokka said after a while. "Sure." "When your wife died, in the fire, were you there?" Wade's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully. This was territory they hadn't touched before the raw places neither had been willing to expose. But Sokka had chosen this place in him, and that gave her the right to ask. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I was there." "Tell me." It wasn't a request, but it wasn't a demand either, just an invitation. So he told her about coming back from town to find the homestead burning, the roof already caved in flames, reaching toward the sky like hands. About hearing Mary screaming inside God those screams and trying to get to her. About the neighbors holding him back because the structure was coming down and going in meant dying too. About how he'd fought them, nearly broke Jim Patterson's jaw before they wrestled him to the ground. About lying in the dirt and hearing the screaming stop, which was somehow worse than the screaming itself. "I couldn't save her," Wade said, his voice flat with old pain. "I was right there and I couldn't do a damn thing except listen to her die." Sokka was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "This is why you saved me. In the ravine." "Maybe. I don't know. Maybe I just couldn't stand to hear someone else die when I had the chance to stop it." "That is not weakness," Sokka said firmly. "That is strength. To care even when caring has hurt you before." Wade looked at her, this Apache warrior woman who'd lost her legs and her tribe, and everything she'd been, and saw in her eyes a recognition that went deeper than words. She understood. Not just intellectually, but in her bones, in the scarred places of her soul. They'd both been broken by loss. They'd both chosen to keep breathing anyway. "Your turn," Wade said. "Tell me about your babies." Most people would have flinched at the directness, but Sokka just nodded like she'd been expecting it. "The first was a girl. She had my mother's eyes, very dark, very knowing. She lived 3 months. The fever took her in winter. We had no medicine, and the medicine man was away. I held her all night, but by morning she was cold." Wade said nothing, just listened. "The second was a boy. He had his father's strength, my husband, killed by soldiers when I was 6 months pregnant. The baby came early because of my grief. He was small, too small. He breathed for 2 hours. I sang him every song I knew, but he left anyway." Sokka's voice was steady, but her hands gripped the edge of her platform. "After that, I could not. I tried to be a woman, tried to weave and cook and prepare for another child, but my body felt like a grave. Everything soft in me had died with my babies, so I became hard instead, became a warrior. It was that or madness." "I'm sorry," Wade said, inadequate but sincere. "We are all sorry," Sokka said. "Sorry changes nothing. But living despite the sorrow, maybe that changes something. Maybe that is the revenge we take against death. We refuse to die too." Wade raised his coffee cup. "To refusing." Sokka picked up her own cup, touched it to his. "To refusing." They drank, and something crystallized between them in that moment. An understanding, an alliance, maybe the beginning of something neither was ready to name yet. Later that night, after Sokka was asleep in the bed and Wade was on his bedroll by the dying fire, he thought about the strange shape his life had taken. 2 months ago, he'd been going through the motions, working and sleeping and working again, feeling nothing much except a dull ache where his heart used to be. Now he had purpose, keeping Sokka safe, helping her heal, figuring out how 2 broken people could build something resembling a life. It wasn't love. Wade told himself that firmly. Love was what he'd had with Mary, years of shared history, comfortable familiarity, the easy intimacy of people who'd grown together. This thing with Sokka was different, raw, built on necessity and mutual survival rather than romance. They were partners in survival, nothing more. But when he fell asleep, he dreamed of dark eyes and determined hands of a woman who'd lost everything and chosen to stay anyway. And when he woke in the gray pre-dawn, the first thought in his mind was her name. The next weeks passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Wade worked the ranch during the day while Sokka managed the cabin, growing stronger and more mobile with each passing day. She taught herself to cook decent meals, to mend clothes with neat, tight stitches, to keep the small space clean and organized. More importantly, she'd started venturing outside, more rolling herself around the property, learning its contours and possibilities. One evening, Wade came home to find her by the creek, nearly a quarter-mile from the cabin. His heart had lurched seeing her gone, but when he'd ridden down to check, she'd just looked at him calmly and said, "I can travel now. Good to know." "You scared 10 years off my life," Wade had said. "You have years to spare." I needed to test myself. She was right, of course. If trouble came, she needed to know her capabilities, her limits. Wade had taught her to shoot she couldn't stand, but she could brace the rifle against her platform and hit targets with disturbing accuracy. "Warriors do not forget how to kill," she'd said matter-of-factly. "We only forget how to die." But it wasn't all preparation and survival. There were good moments, too. Sokka had started teaching Wade Apache words and phrases during their evening talks. He was a terrible student, his tongue couldn't wrap around the sounds properly, but she was patient, correcting his pronunciation with gentle mockery. "You sound like a cow having a bad dream," she'd told him, after one particularly mangled attempt. "Maybe I am a cow having a bad dream," Wade had shot back. "Maybe this whole thing is just one long nightmare." "If it is a nightmare," Sokka had said, her eyes bright with humor, "it is not the worst one I have had." Wade had laughed, then really laughed, and realized it was the first time he'd done so since Mary's death. The sound surprised him, felt almost foreign coming from his chest, but it felt good too, like something rusty finally starting to move again. On a warm evening in late May, nearly 2 months after he'd found her in the ravine, Sokka asked Wade to take her out to watch the sunset. He carried her to a flat rock outcropping that overlooked the valley, settled her there with her platform nearby, and sat beside her. The sky was putting on a show, streaks of orange and purple and gold, the clouds lit up like they were burning. "Beautiful," Sokka said softly. "I thought I would never see another sunset. In the ravine, I thought that was my last." "Glad it wasn't," Wade said. She turned to look at him, and there was something in her eyes he hadn't seen before, something vulnerable and fierce at the same time. "Wade, I need to ask you something important." "All right." "Why do you still sleep on the floor?" Wade blinked, surprised. "What? Every night you give me the bed. You sleep on the hard floor. Your back hurts. I see you wince in the mornings. There is room in the bed for 2 people. So why?" Wade felt heat creep up his neck. "Wouldn't be proper." "Proper?" Sokka laughed, but not unkindly. "We are past proper, you and I. We are a white man and an Apache warrior living alone together. Nothing about this is proper. So tell me the real reason." He looked out at the sunset, buying time. The real reason was that he didn't trust himself, didn't trust the feelings that had been growing quietly in the spaces between their words and silences. Sokka was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional standards and everything to do with strength and spirit. And she was there, present and alive in a way he hadn't let anyone be in 3 years. It would be too easy to reach for her, to seek comfort in touch, to confuse gratitude and loneliness for something deeper. "I don't want to take advantage," Wade said finally. "You're here because you have nowhere else to go. That puts me in a position of power, and I won't abuse that." Sokka was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand, the first time she'd done so since that night under the stars. Her palm was calloused rough from work and wore warm against his. "You think I would stay if I did not want to?" she asked. "You think I am weak, that I cannot say no? I have killed men, Wade. I have survived things that would break most people. If I did not want to be here, I would leave, or I would kill you and take your horse." She said this last part so casually that Wade almost laughed. "I stay because I choose to stay, because you are good, because this place feels safe, because when I look at you, I do not see pity. I see respect, and respect is more valuable than gold." "Sokka, I am not asking you to love me," she interrupted. "I am not even asking you to want me. I am only asking that you stop treating me like I am made of glass. I am not fragile. I am scarred and changed, but I am not broken. Not anymore." Wade looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the truth of it. She had been broken, yes, in that ravine with her legs shattered and her life bleeding out. But in the weeks since, she'd forged herself into something new. Not the warrior she'd been, but something equally strong. A survivor who'd chosen to live deliberately, to find purpose in the small daily victories. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. Do not apologize. Just," she squeezed his hand, "share the bed with me. Not for sex, not for romance, just for warmth and company. We are both alone enough. We do not need to be alone when we sleep too." It made sense. Perfect practical sense. And yet Wade hesitated because crossing that line felt significant in ways he couldn't articulate. Sharing a bed was intimate even without physical touch. It was trust and vulnerability and the quiet acknowledgement that they were becoming something to each other. "Okay," he said finally, "if that's what you want." "It is what I want." That night, for the first time, Wade climbed into the bed beside Sokka instead of making his bedroll on the floor. They lay on opposite sides, careful not to touch, both stiff and hyper-aware of the other's presence. The bed was narrow. He could feel the heat of her body, could hear every breath. "This is strange," Sokka said into the darkness. "Yeah. But good strange, not bad strange." "Yeah," Wade agreed. "Good strange." They lay in silence for a while. Then Sokka said, "My feet are cold." "You don't have feet." "I know I do not have feet." She sounded exasperated. "But I can still feel them. Phantom feet, I think is the word. And they are cold." Wade didn't know what to say to that. "I'm sorry." "It is very annoying. The medicine man told me once that lost limbs still speak to us, that the spirit of them remains even when the flesh is gone. I thought he was being poetic. But no, my feet that do not exist are cold, and they will not shut up about it." Despite the strangeness of the conversation, Wade felt himself smile in the dark. "Want more blankets?" "Yes, please." He got up, found another blanket, spread it over them both. When he lay back down, he was closer to her than before. Not touching, but close enough that he could feel her relax slightly. "Better?" he asked. "Better. Thank you, Wade." "You're welcome." And Wade, "Yeah. I'm glad you found me. In the ravine. I'm glad you did not leave me to die." Wade's throat tightened. "Me too." They fell silent again, but this time it was comfortable. Wade listened to Sokka's breathing gradually slow and deepen as she drifted toward sleep. He stayed awake longer, staring at the dark ceiling, thinking about the strange path that had led him here, from the war, to Mary, to 3 years of grief, to this moment, lying beside an Apache warrior woman who'd lost her legs and somehow gained his respect, his trust, and maybe something more. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Didn't know if the cavalry would come, if Brennan would eventually lose patience, if Sokka would wake up one morning and decide she needed to leave after all. But for tonight, this was enough. The warmth of another person beside him, the knowledge that he wasn't alone, the possibility that broken things could heal if given time and care. Wade closed his eyes, and for the first time in 3 years fell asleep without dreaming of fire. The days grew hotter as June arrived, and with the heat came complications. A fever hit Sokka again, milder this time, but enough to lay her low for 3 days. Wade stayed close, missing work to care for her, and Brennan sent a ranch hand to check on him. The man, a young cowboy named Pete, had seen Sokka through the window and reported back, though Brennan apparently told him to keep his mouth shut. It was a warning, though their time was running out. People were noticing. "We need a plan," Wade told Sokka once she'd recovered. They were sitting outside in the evening shade, the heat still radiating off the rocks. "Can't just keep hoping no one says anything." "I know," Sokka said. She'd been quiet since the fever, something weighing on her mind. "Wade, I must tell you something, about the night before I fell in the ravine." Wade turned to look at her. "All right. My uncle Naichi, he is a war chief, a leader. Before we scattered, he told me something. There is a place deep in the Dragoon Mountains where some of our people hide. Not many, maybe 20, mostly women and old ones and children who cannot run. They stay hidden, hunt quietly, cause no trouble. White soldiers do not look for them because they think all Apache are either dead or on reservations." "And you think you could go there?" Wade asked. "Maybe. If I could get there. But it is far, 3 days on horseback through dangerous country, and
She gestured at her missing legs. I cannot ride, cannot run if soldiers come. I would slow them down, put them at risk. So what are you thinking? Sokka looked at him directly. I am thinking that maybe I do not need to go to them. Maybe I stay here and we tell people I am your wife. Wade felt like he'd been punched. My wife? Why not white men marry Indian women sometimes? It is not common, but it happens. If people think I am your wife, not Apache warrior, just woman, maybe they stop looking. Maybe they stop asking questions. Wade struggled for words. That's a big lie, Sokka. Hard to maintain. Is it? She leaned forward. What would be different? We already live together, already share a bed, already take care of each other. The only difference would be the words we use and the story we tell. Marriage is more than just words and story. I know that, Sokka said patiently. I have been married. I know what it means, but this would not be real marriage, not at first. It would be protection, for both of us. You get a wife, I get a home, and a name that does not have wanted attached to it. We help each other survive. Is that not what we are already doing? Wade stood up, paced a few steps, ran his hand through his hair. His mind was spinning. On one level, it made perfect tactical sense. A white rancher with an Indian wife was unusual, but not unheard of. People might talk, but they probably wouldn't inform the cavalry. It would give Sokka legal protection, a legitimate reason to be here. And if he was honest, the idea of calling her his wife didn't feel wrong, just premature. You're asking me to marry you, Wade said, still trying to wrap his mind around it. I am asking you to pretend to marry me, Sokka corrected. The real thing, the feelings, the commitment that can come later. Or not. This is survival first, everything else second. And if people don't believe it, why would they not believe it? You are a lonely widower. I am a woman who needs protection. Love has been built on less. Wade turned back to face her. She looked calm, rational, like she was proposing a business arrangement rather than a life-changing decision. But he could see tension in her shoulders, uncertainty in her eyes. This wasn't easy for her either. She was putting herself in his hands, trusting him with her safety and her future. If we do this, Wade said slowly, it's not just pretend. Not to me. If I call you my wife, I protect you like my wife. Stand for you like my wife. That's a real commitment, Sokka, whether or not there's feelings involved. You understand that? I understand, she said softly. And I would do the same. Protect you, stand for you, be what a wife should be. In all ways except... She trailed off, but the implication was clear. Except the bed, Wade finished. Yes, unless... She hesitated. Unless someday we both want otherwise. But that is for later. For now, this is about survival. Wade thought about Brennan's deadline, about the cavalry patrols that came through every few weeks, about the precarious balance they'd been maintaining. Thought about the alternative Sokka trying to reach her people through dangerous territory, or getting caught and hanged as a renegade, or simply running until her luck ran out. Thought about going back to being alone in this cabin, working and sleeping and slowly dying inside. All right, he said, we'll do it. Sokka's face lit up with relief and something else, gratitude maybe, or hope. Truly, but we do it right. We go to the town clerk, file papers, make it legal. No half measures. If we're gonna lie, we lie all the way. This week, I'll tell Brennan you're my wife, that I married you quiet because I didn't want to make a fuss about it. He'll understand that at least. The other ranch hands might talk, but talk is different from informing. Sokka rolled closer to him, looked up with those dark, intense eyes. You are saving my life again, Wade Holt. I will not forget this. You're saving mine too, Wade said honestly. Fair trade. She smiled, then genuine and warm, and Wade felt something shift in his chest. This was real now. In a few days, Sokka would be his wife on paper, if nothing else. The idea should have terrified him. Instead, it just felt right, like a puzzle piece sliding into place. They told Brennan the next day. Wade rode out to the ranch headquarters and found his boss shoeing a horse in the barn. Brennan looked up, saw Wade's expression, and sighed. Let me guess, he said. The Apache woman. She's my wife now, Wade said.
Or will be once we file the papers. I'm marrying her Tom, legal and proper. Brennan set down his tools, studied Wade for a long moment. You sure about this people will talk? Some might cause trouble. I'm sure. She's good for me. First time I've felt alive since Mary passed, and she needs protection. This gives her that. She's wanted Wade. If the cavalry finds out, they won't. She's just a woman now, my woman. Not a warrior, not a renegade, just Sokka Holt, wife of a ranch hand. Brennan shook his head slowly, but there was something like respect in his eyes. You're either the bravest man I know or the dumbest. Maybe both. Probably both, Wade agreed. All right, I won't say anything, and I'll make sure the boys keep their mouths shut too. But Wade, if this comes back on me on the ranch, I'll have to let you go. You understand that? I understand, and I appreciate you giving us this chance. Brennan nodded once, then went back to his work. Wade rode home feeling like he'd just jumped off a cliff and was either going to fly or hit the ground hard. Either way, there was no going back now. 3 days later, Wade and Sokka rode into the small town of Wilcox. Wade drove the wagon with Sokka sitting beside him on her platform, dressed in one of Mary's old dresses that he'd kept in a trunk. It was too big, but Sokka had altered it to fit, and she looked almost normal, just a woman without legs, which, while unusual, wasn't unheard of in a territory where accidents and disease took their toll. The town clerk was an older man named Henderson, who'd lost an arm at Shiloh. He looked at Sokka with mild curiosity, but no hostility. When Wade explained they wanted to file for marriage, Henderson just shrugged and pulled out the necessary papers. Names? He asked. Wade Elijah Holt and Sokka. Wade paused, realizing he'd never asked her full name. Just Sokka, she said quietly. My people do not use family names the way white people do. Henderson wrote it down without comment. Any objections to this union from either party? No, sir, Wade said. No, Sokka echoed. Then, by the power invested in me by the Arizona Territory, I pronounce you legally married. That'll be $2. Wade paid, and just like that, it was done. They were married. Husband and wife, at least on paper. Henderson gave them a signed certificate, shook Wade's hand, nodded at Sokka, and sent them on their way. Outside, sitting in the wagon, Wade and Sokka looked at each other. Then Sokka started laughing, not hysterical, just genuine amusement at the absurdity of it all. That was the strangest thing I have ever done, she said, and I have done many strange things. Yeah, Wade agreed, feeling the laughter bubble up in his own chest. Welcome to marriage, Mrs. Holt. Mrs. Holt. Sokka repeated, testing the name. It sounds wrong, like wearing someone else's clothes. You are wearing someone else's clothes, Wade pointed out. True. She smiled at him. Well, husband, what now? Now we go home, Wade said, and we figure out how to make this work. They drove back to the cabin in the warm afternoon sun, and Wade thought about the strange turn his life had taken. 3 months ago, he'd been alone and half dead inside. Now he had a wife, sort of, and a reason to care about tomorrow. It wasn't love, not the way he'd loved Mary, but it was something. A partnership, a shared burden, 2 people holding each other up against a world that wanted to crush them both. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was actually everything. When they got home, Sokka insisted on celebrating. She'd saved back some of the flour and made biscuits slightly burned but edible, and Wade contributed the last of his whiskey. They sat on the porch in the cooling evening and toasted their strange new arrangement. To survival, Sokka said, raising her cup. To partnership, Wade added. To stubborn people who refuse to die, Sokka said, and they both drank. As the stars came out, they sat in comfortable silence. Then Sokka said, Wade, are you scared? Of what? Of this? Of us? Of what we just did? Wade thought about it honestly. Little bit, yeah, Yes, very much. She looked at him. But less scared than I was in the ravine. So that is progress. That's definitely progress, Wade agreed. They went to bed that night as husband and wife, still careful not to touch, still maintaining the space between them. But something had changed. There was a promise in the air now spoken and acknowledged. They belonged to each other, at least in the eyes of the law. And maybe Wade thought as sleep took him someday, they'd belong to each other in truth too. But that was for tomorrow. Tonight they were just two survivors who'd found each other in the darkness and decided to hold on. That was enough. The marriage changed nothing and everything at the same time. In practical terms, their daily routine stayed mostly the same. Wade working the ranch, Sokka managing the cabin, both of them existing in their careful dance of respect and distance. But there was a new weight to their interactions now, a significance that hadn't been there before. Every shared meal felt like a small ceremony. Every good night carried the echo of vows they'd spoken, but didn't quite believe yet. Word spread faster than Wade had expected. Within a week, everyone at the Circle K knew that Wade Holt had married an Indian woman, specifically an Apache woman without legs. The reaction was mixed. Some of the older hands just shrugged it off. They'd seen stranger things in their years on the frontier. The younger cowboys were more curious than hostile, asking questions. Wade deflected with terse answers. A few made crude jokes when they thought he couldn't hear, but nothing that required him to break anyone's jaw. The first real test came 2 weeks after the marriage when Brennan invited them both to a ranch barbecue. It was an annual event meant to build morale and give the hands a chance to blow off steam. Wives and families were invited, which technically now included Sokka. Wade's first instinct was to decline, but Sokka surprised him. "We should go," she said when he told her about the invitation. "You sure lot of people lot of questions." "Exactly. If I am your wife, I must act like your wife. Hiding makes people suspicious. Appearing in public makes the lie real." She was right, but that didn't make Wade feel better about it. Still, they went. Wade drove the wagon into the main ranch compound on a Saturday evening, Sokka beside him in another of Mary's altered dresses, this one blue, faded, but clean. She'd braided her hair and sat straight-backed, projecting a dignity that made Wade's chest tight with something like pride. The barbecue was in full swing when they arrived. Maybe 40 people scattered around the yard. Kids running wild men, drinking women, clustered in groups comparing recipes and gossip. The conversation didn't exactly stop when Wade and Sokka appeared, but it definitely quieted. Eyes tracked them as Wade helped Sokka onto her rolling platform, and they made their way toward where Brennan stood by the smoking pit. "Wade," Brennan said, nodding. Then to Sokka, "Mrs. Holt, welcome." "Thank you for inviting us," Sokka said, her English careful but clear. Brennan's wife, Margaret, appeared then, a sturdy woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and no-nonsense demeanor. She looked at Sokka without flinching, then smiled. "I hear you've been keeping Wade's cabin clean. Lord knows that man needed a firm hand." "He lives like a bear," Sokka said solemnly. "But I am training him." Margaret laughed genuine and loud. "Aren't we all training them? Come on, honey. Let me introduce you to some of the other wives. They've been dying to meet you." She wheeled Sokka away before Wade could object, leaving him standing with Brennan. The ranch boss handed him a beer. "Your wife's got spine," Brennan observed. "Yeah," Wade agreed, watching Sokka disappear into a cluster of ranch wives. "That she does. Some of the boys are taking bets on how long it'll last. I told them to shut up, but you know how it is. Let them bet. We're not going anywhere." Brennan studied him. "You actually care about her, don't you? This isn't just about giving her protection." Wade took a long drink, considering his answer. "Don't know what it is yet," he said finally. "But yeah, I care more than I thought I would." "Be careful, Wade. Caring makes you vulnerable, and vulnerable men make mistakes." "Already made all the mistakes I can afford," Wade said. "Figure I'm due for something to go right." Across the yard, Sokka was surrounded by women answering questions with patient dignity. Wade watched her explain her injuries, a riding accident they'd agreed to say, and saw the women's expressions shift from curiosity to sympathy. Margaret handed her a plate of food, and one of the younger wives crouched down to show Sokka her baby. Slowly, impossibly, Sokka was being absorbed into the community. The evening wore on. Wade mingled awkwardly, accepted congratulations on his marriage with brief nods, deflected the more intrusive questions. He kept one eye on Sokka, ready to intervene if anyone gave her trouble. But the trouble never came. If anything, the women seemed charmed by her quiet strength, her dry humor, the way she didn't flinch from their curiosity. When it was time to leave, several of the wives hugged Sokka goodbye. Margaret pressed a jar of preserves into her hands. "You come by any time," she said firmly. "A woman needs friends, especially out here." In the wagon heading home under a sky full of stars, Sokka was quiet. Wade glanced over at her. "You okay?" "Yes, just surprised. I thought they would hate me or fear me, but they were kind." "You're good with people," Wade said. "Always have been, I'd guess. Being a warrior doesn't mean you don't know how to talk." "My mother always said a warrior fights with more than just weapons. We fight with words, with patience, with the ability to make people see us as human instead of enemy." Sokka looked down at the jar of preserves. "These women, they saw me as human, as one of them. It has been a long time since anyone saw me that way." "Get used to it," Wade said. "You're Mrs. Holt now. Part of the community whether they like it or not." Sokka smiled in the darkness. "Mrs. Holt, I think I am beginning to like that name." But their peace didn't last long. 3 days after the barbecue trouble arrived in the form of 2 men on horseback, not cavalry, but something worse, bounty hunters. Wade was at the ranch when they showed up at the cabin. Sokka was outside hanging laundry on a line she'd convinced Wade to string up for her. She heard the horses before she saw them and immediately went still, every instinct screaming danger. By the time the riders came around the bend, she'd already rolled herself to the porch and grabbed the rifle Wade always left within reach. The men were rough-looking, one tall and lean, with a scar across his jaw, the other shorter and thick-bodied with mean eyes that cataloged everything. They pulled up 20 feet from the cabin, hands carefully visible, but Sokka could see the guns on their hips. "Afternoon," the tall one said, voice carrying false friendliness. "We're looking for a woman. Apache crippled, maybe wounded. Heard tell there might be someone fitting that description in these parts." Sokka kept the rifle pointed at the ground, but ready. "I am Sokka Holt. This is my husband's land. State your business." The 2 men exchanged glances. The shorter one spat tobacco juice. "Holt, huh? That your married name?" "Yes." "Convenient. You know there's a reward out for a woman who looks a lot like you." "Apache warrior goes by the name Sokka, last seen near Fort Huachuca 2 months back." "I am no warrior," Sokka said calmly, though her heart hammered. "I am a wife. I lost my legs in a riding accident." "That's so." The tall man dismounted slowly. "Mind if we come up and ask you some questions? Just want to make sure there's no confusion." "Stay where you are." Sokka raised the rifle, now smooth and practiced. "My husband does not like strangers on his property. You have questions you can ask from there." The man stopped reassessing. Clearly, he hadn't expected an Indian woman without legs to be so self-possessed. "No need for that rifle, ma'am. We're just doing our job." "Your job is to collect money for Apache scalps," Sokka said flatly. "I know what you are, and you have no business here." The shorter man's hand drifted toward his gun. "Now you listen here." The crack of a rifle shot cut him off. Dirt exploded 2 feet in front of his horse, and the animal reared. When everyone looked around, Wade was there mounted on Buck, his rifle smoking and already chambered with another round. "My wife told you to state your business from where you are," Wade said, voice cold as January. "I suggest you listen." The tall man raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Just looking for a fugitive friend. Apache woman dangerous. If your wife's who she says she is, we've got no quarrel." "She's my wife, legal and registered in Wilcox. You want to see the papers?" "That won't be necessary," the man said. "But you understand we have to check. The description matches Apache female, lost her legs around the right time." "Lost her legs in a riding accident," Wade said. "Month before I married her. Now she's Sokka Holt, American citizen by marriage. Whatever Apache woman you're looking for, this isn't her." The 2 bounty hunters exchanged another look. Clearly they suspected the truth, but proving it was another matter. And confronting an armed man defending his wife on his own land was a good way to end up dead reward or no reward. "All right," the tall man said finally. "We'll be on our way. But if we find out you're lying, you'll what?" Wade's voice went dangerous. You'll come back and threaten my wife again, try it, and I'll shoot you on sight for trespassing. The men mounted up the shorter one, glaring but smart enough to keep his mouth shut. They rode off at a trot, disappearing down the trail. Wade waited until they were out of sight, then dismounted and went to Sokka. She was shaking. He realized fine tremors running through her arms from adrenaline. You okay? He asked softly. Yes. No. She lowered the rifle. They knew Wade. They knew who I am. Suspected. Big difference between suspecting and proving. He crouched down beside her platform. But they'll be back, or they'll talk and someone else will come. We need to be ready. That night they made plans. Wade showed Sokka the hiding place he'd been working on, a false floor beneath the cabin, accessed through a trap door he'd concealed under the rug. It was cramped and dark, barely 4 feet deep, but it was invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. If anyone comes, cavalry, bounty hunters, anyone, you get down there, Wade said. I'll handle it. And if they search, they won't find you. I'll make sure of it. Sokka looked at the dark space and felt a flutter of panic. It is like a grave. It's survival, Wade said firmly. Couple hours down there is better than hanging. She knew he was right, but that didn't make it easier. Still, she nodded. They practiced Wade helping her down into the space, replacing the trapdoor, repositioning the rug and chair. From above, there was no sign anything existed below. Sokka lay in the darkness, breathing shallow, fighting the urge to scream. After 5 minutes, Wade lifted the door. Good, he said. You did good. But Sokka's hands were shaking again. Being trapped in the dark brought back the ravine, the helplessness, the certainty of death. Wade saw it in her face and pulled her into his arms without thinking. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed against his chest. I've got you, Wade said quietly. I won't let them take you. You cannot promise that. No, but I can promise I'll die trying to stop them. Sokka pulled back to look at him. Do not die for me, Wade Holt. I have had enough death. Then we'll both stay alive, Wade said. Deal. Deal. That night they lay in bed closer than usual, not quite touching, but near enough to feel each other's warmth. The pretense was crumbling. Whatever this marriage had started as convenience, protection, survival, it was becoming something else. Something neither of them had words for yet. Wade. Sokka's voice was soft in the darkness. Yeah. Thank you for standing with me today. For not giving me up to save yourself. Never crossed my mind, Wade said honestly. It should have. It would have been easier. Easier isn't always better. He shifted slightly. Sokka, I need to ask you something. When those men showed up, were you scared? Terrified, she admitted. But I've been scared before. Fear is just another enemy to fight. You don't always have to fight it alone anymore. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out in the darkness and found his hand. Her fingers laced through his, the first time they'd held hands like this, deliberately intimate rather than practical. I know, she whispered. That is what frightens me most. Getting used to not being alone. What happens when I am alone again? You won't be, Wade said, squeezing her hand. Not if I have anything to say about it. They fell asleep that way. Hands clasped in the darkness, two broken people holding on to each other like lifelines. Outside, coyotes howled. The desert breathed its ancient rhythms. And somewhere in the mountains, bounty hunters made plans. But inside the cabin, for that moment, there was peace. The next week passed in tense watchfulness. Wade took to carrying his rifle everywhere, even to the outhouse. Sokka stayed inside, more watching through the window, the rifle always within reach. They were waiting for the other shoe to drop, both knowing that the bounty hunter's visit was just the opening move. The second move came 6 days later in the form of a cavalry patrol. 12 men, led by a Lieutenant Wade, didn't recognize. They rode up to the cabin at mid-morning when Wade was splitting firewood and Sokka was inside making bread. Wade saw them coming and called out a warning. Cavalry, get down! Sokka moved fast, dropping into the hiding space with practiced efficiency. Wade replaced the trapdoor, repositioned everything, then walked outside to meet the soldiers. His rifle was leaning against the cabin wall, visible but not threatening. The lieutenant dismounted a young man with a fresh scrubbed face that probably hadn't seen real combat. "You Wade Holt." "That's right. I'm Lieutenant Morrison. We're looking for an Apache fugitive woman about 25 years old, both legs amputated or severely injured. We received a report that she might be here." "Received a report from who?" Wade asked, though he already knew. "The bounty hunters." "That's not relevant. Is she here?" "My wife's inside," Wade said calmly. "But she's not who you're looking for." "Your wife is Apache." "Yes, and an American citizen by virtue of our marriage." Morrison looked skeptical. "I'm going to need to speak with her." "She's making bread. Can't just leave dough rising, Lieutenant. But I can answer your questions." "I need to see her," Morrison said firmly. "Protocol." Wade considered his options. He could refuse, but that would make them suspicious enough to search. Better to play cooperative and hope Morrison saw what he expected to see: a rancher's Indian wife, nothing more. "All right," Wade said. "But keep your men back. She's shy around strangers." He went inside, making sure the door blocked Morrison's view. Quickly, he lifted the trap door. Sokka looked up at him from the darkness, eyes wide. "Cavalry wants to talk to you," Wade whispered. "Can you do this?" "Yes." Her voice was steady despite the fear he could see in her face. He helped her out and onto her platform, then called for Morrison to enter. The lieutenant came in, removing his hat, eyes immediately going to Sokka. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm Lieutenant Morrison. I need to ask you some questions." "Of course," Sokka said, her voice soft, her eyes downcast in a show of submission that Wade knew was pure performance. She'd spent 2 months being a warrior's equal in this cabin, but now she played the meek Indian wife to perfection. "What's your name?" "Sokka Holt." "Where are you from?" "I was born in the Chiricahua territory, but I have lived many places." "How did you lose your legs?" "Riding accident. My horse threw me down a ravine 2 months ago." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "You're Apache." "Yes, but I am not a warrior. I have never fought against white soldiers." It was technically true Sokka had fought against white soldiers, but she was no longer a warrior. The lie and truth blended seamlessly. "We have reports of an Apache warrior woman who was injured in that same time frame," Morrison said. "She's wanted for attacks on settlers." "I am sorry," Sokka said, "but that is not me. I am just a wife now. I cook and clean and try to make a home. That is all." Morrison looked around the cabin, taking in the neat interior, the bread rising on the table, the domestic scene that spoke to routine rather than hiding. He looked at Sokka's stumps, at her platform, at the way she kept her eyes lowered respectfully. "How long have you been married?" he asked Wade. "About a month. We filed papers in Wilcox. And before that, she was alone trying to survive after her accident. I found her, brought her here, nursed her back to health. Seemed like the right thing to do." Morrison was clearly unsatisfied, but he had no evidence, just suspicions fed by bounty hunters who wanted reward money. He replaced his hat. "All right, but I'm filing a report, and there will likely be follow-up questions. You're required to cooperate with any further investigation." "We'll cooperate with anything legal," Wade said evenly, "but harassment of my wife won't be tolerated." Morrison's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Good day, Mr. Holt, ma'am." He left, and Wade watched through the window as the patrol mounted up and rode away. Only when they were completely out of sight did he let out the breath he'd been holding. "That was too close," Sokka said, her submissive demeanor dropping away like a shed skin. "Yeah." Wade turned to face her. "But you were perfect. Playing meek like that, I almost believed it myself." "I have learned to be what people expect," Sokka said bitterly. "It is how you survive when you have no power. You make them think you are harmless." "You're anything but harmless," she smiled slightly. "But they do not know that, and that is our advantage." Wade helped her back onto her platform, and they went about their day. But the fear lingered. Morrison had believed them mostly, but the investigation would continue. Eventually, someone would dig deeper. Eventually, the truth would come out. That evening, sitting on the porch in the cooling air, Sokka said what they were both thinking. "They will not stop. The cavalry, the bounty hunters. Someone will figure it out. Probably, Wade agreed. So what do we do? Wade looked out at the darkening valley, at the land he'd come to love in his years here. Then he looked at Sokka, at this fierce, damaged woman who'd somehow become the center of his world. We stand our ground, he said. We're married legal and proper. They can suspect all they want, but suspicion isn't proof. We just keep being who we say we are until everyone gets bored and moves on. And if they do not move on, then we fight. Wade met her eyes directly. I meant what I said. I won't let them take you, whatever it costs. Sokka reached out and took his hand again, that gesture that had become their private language. You are a good man, Wade Holt. Better than I deserve. You deserve everything, Wade said fiercely. You deserve to live, to be safe, to have a home. Don't ever think different. She looked at him with something raw and vulnerable in her expression. I think I am beginning to love you, she whispered. Is that foolish? Wade's heart stopped, then started again, double time. No, he said, his voice rough. No, that's not foolish, because I think I'm beginning to love you too. The words hung between them, huge and terrifying and true. They'd been married for over a month, had shared a bed and a home, and their darkest fears. But this was the first time either had acknowledged what was growing between them, something that had started as survival and transformed into something deeper. Sokka moved closer on her platform. Wade leaned down. Their lips met in a kiss that was tentative at first, then deeper, carrying months of loneliness and fear and desperate hope. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Well, Wade said shakily, guess this just got real. It has been real, but Sokka said. We were just too scared to say it. Yeah. He kissed her again, softer this time. Scared of this, too. Terrified, she admitted. But good terrified. The kind that means something matters. They went inside as the stars emerged, and for the first time since they'd started sharing the bed, there was no careful distance. Sokka reached for Wade, and he came to her, and in the darkness, they discovered each other slowly, carefully, two people with scars and damage learning how to be whole together. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments, uncertainty, the physical complications of Sokka's injuries, but there was also tenderness, laughter, the profound relief of being fully known by another person. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Sokka's head on Wade's chest, his arms around her. Is this what marriage is supposed to be? Sokka asked quietly. I think this is what love is supposed to be, Wade said. The rest is just details. Outside, the night deepened. Somewhere in the darkness, threats were still gathering, bounty hunters and cavalry and the relentless machinery of a government that wanted all Apache people dead or imprisoned. But inside the cabin, two broken people had finally become whole together, had found in each other the courage to keep fighting for the life they were building. Tomorrow would bring new dangers. Tomorrow they might have to run or hide or stand and fight. But tonight they had this, the warmth of skin against skin, the rhythm of matched breathing, the revolutionary act of choosing to love when the world said they shouldn't. Tonight they were home, and that made them ready for whatever came next. The morning after they'd finally admitted their feelings and made their marriage real in every sense, Wade woke to find Sokka already up sitting by the window with her rifle across her lap. The early light caught the planes of her face, and he could see the warrior in her again, alert, watchful, ready for whatever came next. Trouble, he asked, pushing himself up on one elbow. Not yet. But it is coming. She didn't look away from the window. I can feel it, like a storm building. Wade got up and went to her, placed a hand on her shoulder. She leaned into his touch, a small gesture that spoke volumes about how far they'd come. 3 months ago, she would have flinched away. Now she sought his comfort as naturally as breathing. Maybe the storm will pass us by, Wade said, though he didn't believe it any more than she did. Storms do not pass Apache women by, Sokka said softly. They never have. She was right, of course. By midday, the storm arrived in the form of 4 riders, the 2 bounty hunters from before, plus 2 men Wade recognized as ranch hands from a neighboring spread. They came hard and fast, and they weren't asking questions this time. Wade was in the garden when he heard the hoofbeats. He grabbed his rifle and ran for the cabin, shouting for Sokka. She was already moving, propelling herself toward the trap door with the speed born of practice. But she wasn't fast enough. The riders were at the cabin before she could get down. The tall bounty hunter kicked in the door just as Wade reached the porch. "That's far enough, Holt. We know she's here and we know who she is. Found a soldier who recognized her description, Sokka, warrior woman from Naichi's band. There's $500 on her head and we're collecting." Wade raised his rifle. "She's my wife. You're not taking her anywhere." "Your wife's a murderer," the shorter bounty hunter snarled. He had his gun drawn, now pointed at Wade. "Killed 3 soldiers in an ambush 2 years back. That makes her a criminal, not a citizen." Inside the cabin, Sokka had stopped trying to hide. She sat on her platform, her own rifle raised, pointed at the men crowding through the doorway. Her face was calm, almost serene, like she'd been expecting this moment all along. "I am Sokka," she said clearly. "Yes, I fought against your soldiers. Yes, I killed men who were trying to kill my people, but I am no longer a warrior. I am a wife now, and this is my home. You will leave, or I will defend it." "You ain't in no position to defend anything, woman," one of the ranch hands said. He was young, probably not even 20, with the cruel stupidity of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "You can't even stand up." "I do not need legs to pull a trigger," Sokka said calmly, and shifted her aim directly to his chest. The standoff hung there, balanced on the edge of violence. 4 men against 2, one of them. A woman without legs. But everyone in that cabin knew that bullets didn't care about odds. Someone was going to die here. Maybe everyone. Wade's mind raced, calculating angles and possibilities. He couldn't shoot all 4 before they got him or Sokka. But if he could create enough chaos, maybe she could get to the hiding place. Maybe he could hold them off long enough for her to escape somehow. It was a terrible plan, but it was all he had. Then Brennan's voice cut through the tension, like a knife. "Everyone put your damn guns down before I shoot all of you myself." Wade risked a glance toward the doorway. Brennan stood there with his own rifle, and behind him were 6 Circle K ranch hands, all armed, all looking grim. The odds had just shifted dramatically. "This is Circle K land," Brennan said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Wade Holt works for me, which makes him my responsibility. And that woman is his legal wife, which makes her my responsibility too. Now you bounty-hunting sons of bitches are going to lower your weapons and get off my property, or we're going to have a problem." The tall bounty hunter's jaw tightened. "There's a reward for her. Legal reward posted by the army. We have every right." "You have the right to take it up with the territorial marshal," Brennan interrupted. "File your claim, present your evidence, let the law sort it out. What you don't have the right to do is break into a man's home and threaten his wife. That's attempted robbery at best, attempted murder at worst. And out here, we handle both the same way." The tension held for another long moment. Then the tall bounty hunter lowered his gun, recognizing a losing hand when he saw one. His partner and the 2 ranch hands followed suit, though the young one did it with visible reluctance. "This ain't over," the tall man said as they backed toward the door. "We'll be filing with the marshal, and when we do, the army will come for her. And you too, Holt, for harboring." "Then I guess I'll deal with that when it happens," Wade said. "Now get out." The 4 men left, mounting up and riding away with enough backward glances to make it clear this was far from finished. Brennan waited until they were out of sight, then lowered his rifle and looked at Wade. "You all right?" "Yeah, thanks, Tom. That could have gone bad." "It's gonna go bad," Brennan said flatly. "Just a matter of when. They'll file with the marshal like they said, and Morrison will back up their claim. Within a week, maybe 2, there'll be official orders for her arrest." He looked at Sokka. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you can't stay here." "I know," Sokka said quietly. She'd lowered her rifle, but hadn't put it down. "I have always known." Wade felt something crack inside his chest. After everything they'd been through, after finally admitting what they meant to each other, they were going to lose it all. He looked at Brennan desperately. "There has to be another way. She's a citizen now. Legal wife. Doesn't matter," Brennan said, not unkindly. "Apache warriors don't get citizenship, marriage, or no marriage. The law's pretty clear on that. If she's who they say she is, and we all know she is, then she's classified as an enemy combatant. They'll hang her, Wade, or lock her up until she dies. Either way, you lose her." "No," Wade's voice was firm. No, I'm not losing her. We'll run. Head to Mexico. Start over somewhere they can't find us. Wade, Sokka started. We'll go tonight. Wade continued the plan forming as he spoke. Take Buck and whatever supplies we can carry. You said there's Apache in the Dragoon Mountains. Maybe they'll help us get across the border. We can... Wade. Sokka's voice was louder now, cutting through his desperate planning. Stop! He stopped, looked at her, saw something in her expression that made his stomach drop. I cannot run, Sokka said simply. Not really. I am too slow, too visible. A white man traveling alone might make it to Mexico. A white man with a legless Apache wife will be caught within 2 days. She set her rifle aside carefully. You know this is true. I don't care. We'll figure it out. I'm not leaving you. You have to, Sokka said, and her voice cracked slightly. Wade, I love you. That is why you have to leave. Save yourself. I will handle what comes. Handle it how they'll kill you. Maybe. Or maybe I go back to my people in the mountains. Let them decide what to do with a warrior who cannot fight. She managed a small smile. Either way you live. You keep your ranch, your work, your life. That is what matters. The hell it is? Wade's voice rose. You're what matters. We're what matters. I'm not going back to being half dead and alone. I won't. Brennan cleared his throat. There might be another option. Not a great one, but better than running or waiting for the marshal. Both Wade and Sokka turned to look at him. The reservation, Brennan said. San Carlos. If she turns herself in, voluntarily claims she wants to surrender and live peacefully, they might show leniency, put her on the reservation instead of prison. San Carlos is a death camp, Sokka said bitterly. Slow death instead of fast, but still death. People starve there, die from disease, from despair. I would rather hang. I know it's bad, Brennan acknowledged, but it's not a death sentence. People survive there. And if you're there legally registered and documented, Wade can visit you. Eventually, if things calm down, maybe there's a path to getting you out. That's years, Wade protested. Decades, maybe. You're asking her to give up her life. I'm asking her to stay alive, Brennan countered, which is more than she'll get from any other option. Wade looked at Sokka, saw her weighing the possibilities. San Carlos was notorious, overcrowded, undersupplied, a place where Apache people were sent to be forgotten. But Brennan was right about one thing: it was survival. Grim, barely tolerable survival, but survival nonetheless. How long do we have? Wade asked. Few days, maybe a week before the marshal gets official orders. I can slow things down a bit, say you're out tracking cattle, buy you some time, but not much. Brennan shifted his weight. Think about it. Whatever you decide, I'll help however I can. But decide fast. He left then, taking his men with him. The cabin felt suddenly huge and empty, despite Wade and Sokka both being there. They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on them. Finally, Sokka spoke. Tell me about San Carlos, the truth. Wade didn't want to, but she deserved honesty. It's bad. Overcrowded, not enough food or water. Disease runs through it like wildfire. The agents steal most of the supplies meant for the Apache, sell them for profit. People there are broken, defeated. It's where the government sends Apache to die slowly and out of sight. And you think I should go there? Her voice was quiet, not accusing, just asking. No, Wade said. God, no. But I also don't want you dead. And those are the only real choices we have. You go to San Carlos and at least stay alive, or you run and probably get caught and hanged, or you wait here and definitely get caught and hanged. There is another choice, Sokka said softly. I fight. Here when they come for me. I take as many of them with me as I can. Die as a warrior, not as a prisoner. Wade's throat tightened. Please don't. Why? It would be faster, cleaner, better than wasting away in a camp. Because I love you, Wade said, his voice breaking. Because the thought of you dying, any kind of dying, makes me want to tear the world apart. Because we just found each other, and I'm not ready to let go. Sokka rolled closer to him, took his hands in hers. Then what do we do? Wade pulled her close, held her tight, and felt the enormity of what they were facing. They'd survived so much: her injuries, his grief, the constant threat of discovery. They'd built something real and good out of ashes and blood. And now it was all crumbling anyway because the world wouldn't let an Apache warrior and a white rancher just exist in peace. San Carlos, he said finally, hating every word. You go to San Carlos, voluntarily like Brennan said. Play the reformed warrior, the woman who wants peace. And I'll visit you every chance I get, every week if they'll let me. And we'll figure out a way to get you out. I don't know how yet, but we will. That could be years, Wade. You cannot put your life on hold for years. Watch me, Wade said fiercely. You're my wife. In sickness and health, remember, this is just prolonged sickness. But we're not giving up. We're not letting them win. Sokka was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right. I will go to San Carlos, but Wade, if it is truly as bad as you say, if I am dying there, you must promise me something. Anything. Promise you will find a way to end it. Bring me poison, or a gun, or just help me escape to die free. I will not waste away in a cage. I will choose my own ending. Wade wanted to refuse to say he'd never help her die. But he understood what she was asking. Dignity, control, the right to decide her own fate rather than let the government strip even that from her. It was the last thing she could ask of him and the hardest thing he could promise. I promise, he whispered. If it comes to that, I promise. They held each other as the afternoon light faded, two people trying to memorize the feel of being together before they were torn apart. That night they made love with a desperation that bordered on violence, trying to imprint themselves on each other's bodies to create memories strong enough to survive separation. In the morning, Wade rode to Fort Thomas to make arrangements. The commanding officer there was a Captain Hendricks, a career soldier with a reputation for being strict but fair. Wade explained the situation his wife, an Apache woman, wanted to turn herself in voluntarily and be placed on the San Carlos reservation. Hendricks was suspicious at first, clearly wondering why any Apache would choose San Carlos voluntarily, but Wade spun the story they'd prepared. Sokka had been injured, couldn't survive in the wild anymore, wanted the safety and security of reservation life. She was willing to cooperate fully, provide information about her band's movements, anything that would prove her reformed status. It was all lies, of course. Sokka would never betray her people. But Hendricks didn't need to know that. He just needed to believe that this was a peaceful surrender rather than a forced capture. That distinction might make the difference between Sokka being treated as a prisoner of war or as a refugee. I'll need to verify her identity, Hendricks said. Make sure she is who you say she is. If this is the warrior woman Morrison reported, there will be additional protocols. She'll cooperate, Wade assured him. Just treat her with respect. She's my wife, Captain. Whatever she was before, that's what she is now. Hendricks studied Wade for a long moment. You really love her? More than anything. Then I'm sorry, Hendricks said, and he sounded like he meant it. This isn't going to be easy. San Carlos is, well, you probably know what it's like, and visits are restricted, once a month at most supervised. You won't be able to just ride in whenever you want. Once a month. Wade felt something die inside him, but he kept his face neutral. I understand. When can we bring her in? Tomorrow, noon. Bring documentation of your marriage and make sure she's prepared to answer questions. Hendricks hesitated, then added, For what it's worth, Holt, I respect what you're doing. Most men would have turned her in for the reward money. You're trying to save her. That counts for something. Does it count for enough to keep her alive? Wade asked. I hope so, Hendricks said. I genuinely hope so. Wade rode back to the cabin as the sun was setting. Sokka was waiting on the porch, and she knew from his face what he'd arranged. She didn't cry. Wade had learned that Sokka didn't cry. Not for herself, but her eyes were bright and hard. Tomorrow, she asked. Tomorrow at noon. She nodded slowly. Then we have tonight. They spent their last night of freedom together talking about everything and nothing. Sokka told Wade stories about her childhood, about learning to track and hunt from her grandmother, about the first time she'd ridden a horse alone and felt like she could fly. Wade told her about growing up in Tennessee, about his father's workshop and the smell of cut wood, about meeting Mary at a church social and knowing immediately she was the one. Do you think she would approve? Sokka asked. Mary, of us. Wade considered it honestly. Yeah, I think she would. Mary always said everyone deserved a chance at happiness. She'd want me to be happy even if it meant loving someone else. I wish I could have met her. She would have liked you. You both had that same stubborn streak. Sokka smiled. I am very stubborn. It is one of my best qualities. One of many, Wade said. He pulled her close, breathed in the scent of her hair, smoke, and sage, and something uniquely hers. I'm going to get you out of there, Sokka. However long it takes, I'm going to find a way. I know, she said, but if you cannot, if it is truly impossible, I need you to promise me something else. What? Live, Sokka said fiercely. Do not waste your life pining for me. If I'm gone, truly gone, then you live. You find someone else if you can, you build a life, you remember me, but you do not die for me. Promise me that. Sokka, promise me, Wade. He couldn't speak for a moment, couldn't get past the lump in his throat. Finally he managed, I promise, but it's not going to come to that. You're going to survive and we're going to figure this out. I hope you are right, Sokka said. But if you are wrong, at least we had this, these months together. It is more than most people ever get. They fell asleep in each other's arms for the last time as free people. Wade stayed awake long after Sokka's breathing had deepened into sleep, memorizing the weight of her against him, the rhythm of her heartbeat, the small sounds she made in her dreams. He tried to imagine visiting her once a month at San Carlos, tried to picture years of brief supervised meetings instead of this intimacy. The image made him feel sick, but the alternative was losing her completely, and Wade had lost enough. He'd fight to keep her alive even if alive meant separated, even if it meant years of waiting and hoping and slowly dying inside. Because the opposite of hope wasn't despair, it was giving up, and Wade Holt didn't know how to give up. Morning came too fast. They dressed in silence, both moving with the mechanical precision of people trying not to feel too much. Sokka put on her best dress, braided her hair, sat straight on her platform like she was preparing for battle, which in a way she was. Wade loaded their documentation into his saddlebag, the marriage certificate letters from Brennan, vouching for Sokka's character, anything that might help establish her as a reformed civilian rather than a dangerous warrior. It probably wouldn't matter, but he had to try. The ride to Fort Thomas took 3 hours. Wade drove the wagon slowly, stretching out every minute of freedom they had left. Sokka was quiet beside him, her hand resting on his thigh, her face composed, but her grip tight enough to hurt. As the fort came into view, a collection of dusty buildings surrounded by a wooden palisade, Sokka finally spoke. Wade, whatever happens in there, whatever they say or do not fight them. Do not give them a reason to hurt you. I can't just... Yes, you can. You must. She turned to look at him, her eyes fierce. I am strong enough to survive San Carlos, but I am not strong enough to survive knowing that you died trying to save me. So you will be smart. You will be patient. You will visit me when they allow it, and you will wait for the right moment to help me. But you will not throw your life away. Promise me. I already promised, Wade said, his voice rough. Promise again. I promise, he said. I won't throw my life away. I'll be smart. I'll be patient. But I'm not giving up on you. I know, Sokka said softly. That is why I love you. They entered the fort at noon exactly. Captain Hendricks was waiting with a clerk and 2 soldiers. He greeted them with professional courtesy, had them sign several documents, asked Sokka a series of questions about her history and her intentions. She answered everything calmly, admitting to her past as a warrior, but framing it as something she'd done out of necessity, not malice. She claimed to want peace now, to want a chance at a normal life. It was a performance, and both Wade and Hendricks knew it, but it was a necessary performance, the fiction that allowed them all to maintain the illusion that this was civilized and just. Finally, Hendricks said, Mrs. Holt, based on your voluntary surrender and your husband's testimony, I'm authorizing your transfer to the San Carlos reservation. You'll be under military supervision during transport and will be required to report to the agency there upon arrival. Do you understand? I understand, Sokka said. Mr. Holt, you have the right to visit your wife once monthly on the first Sunday. Visits will be supervised and limited to 2 hours. Any attempt to help her escape or to smuggle contraband will result in arrest and prosecution. Do you understand?
I understand, Wade said, though every word felt like a nail in his chest. Hendricks nodded to the two soldiers. Escort Mrs. Holt to the transport wagon. We leave in an hour. This was it, the moment of separation. Wade helped Sokka off the wagon, held her close one last time, while the soldiers waited at a respectful distance. He could feel her trembling despite her composed expression. I love you, Wade whispered into her hair. Every day, every moment, I love you. And I love you, Sokka whispered back. Do not forget me. Never. Not possible. She pulled back, touched his face with one hand, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. Then she straightened her spine, became once again the warrior she'd been trained to be, and nodded to the soldiers. They lifted her into the military wagon, settled her on a bench, and secured the gate. Wade stood there and watched as the wagon rolled away, carrying his wife to a place designed to break spirits and crush hope. He watched until the dust obscured the wagon completely, until there was nothing left to see but empty desert. Then he climbed into his own wagon and drove back to his cabin alone. The cabin felt cavernous without her. Wade walked through it in a daze, seeing Sokka everywhere by the fire, where she'd cooked at the window, where she'd kept watch in the bed, where they'd finally admitted what they meant to each other. The rolling platform she'd used sat in the corner, abandoned and useless. Wade couldn't bring himself to put it away. That night, he lay in their bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to remember how he'd survived after Mary died. Tried to find that same numb determination that had carried him through 3 years of going through motions. But it wasn't there anymore. Sokka had awakened something in him that couldn't be put back to sleep. He was alive now, fully and painfully alive, and every moment without her felt like bleeding out slowly. But he'd made promises, to stay alive, to be patient, to wait for the right moment, to visit her once a month and remind her she wasn't forgotten, to figure out a way to get her out of San Carlos, no matter how long it took. Wade got up, lit a lamp, found paper and ink. He started making lists, people he knew, favors he could call in, legal loopholes that might exist, anything that could possibly help. It was probably futile. The system was designed to be inescapable. But Wade had learned something in the months with Sokka. Survival wasn't about having good options. It was about refusing to accept that there were no options at all. The first Sunday came. Wade rode to San Carlos before dawn arrived as the sun was rising over the reservation. The place was worse than he'd imagined, rows of squalid tents and ramshackle structures, thousands of Apache people crammed into a space meant for hundreds. The smell hit him first, unwashed bodies. Human waste despair made physical. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter, and agency men moved through the camp with clipboards counting heads like they were inventory. It took an hour to get permission to see Sokka, another hour to find her among the masses of people. When he finally did, she was sitting outside a small tent, her platform beside her, looking thinner and harder than when he'd left her a month ago. But when she saw him, her face transformed. Not quite a smile, but close. "Wade," she said, and there was so much relief in that one word that it almost broke him. "Hey," he said, crouching down to be at her eye level. "How are you holding up?" "I am alive," Sokka said simply. "That is something." They had 2 hours supervised by a bored soldier who at least had the decency to give them some space. Sokka told Wade about life on the reservation, the inadequate food, the disease running rampant, the casual cruelty of the agents. But she also told him about the Apache women who'd taken her in, who shared what little they had, who reminded her that community could exist even in hell. "I am not alone here," Sokka said. "That makes it bearable." Wade told her about the cabin, about Brennan's continued support, about his efforts to find legal avenues for her release. It all sounded pathetic and inadequate, but Sokka listened intently, holding on to every word like they were lifelines. Too soon their time was up. The soldier indicated they needed to wrap up. Wade pulled Sokka close one more time, whispered, "I'm working on it. I promise I'm working on it." "I know," she whispered back. "I trust you." The ride back was agony. Wade had to physically stop himself from turning around, from riding back and trying to break her out. It would be suicide, and it would get Sokka killed too. But the impulse was there, strong and nearly overwhelming. The months that followed fell into a brutal rhythm. Once a month, Wade visited San Carlos.
Once a month, he saw Sokka looking progressively more worn down by the conditions there. Once a month, he made promises he didn't know if he could keep, and she assured him she was surviving. Between visits, Wade worked. Not just at the ranch, but at something more important. He talked to lawyers, to territorial officials, to anyone who might have influence. He wrote letters to congressmen and army brass and newspaper editors. He saved every penny he could, thinking maybe he could bribe someone, buy Sokka's release somehow. He became obsessed, driven, functioning on rage and love in equal measure. 6 months passed. Then a year. Sokka was still alive, but barely. The reservation was taking its toll. She'd contracted tuberculosis, was recovering slowly, but the disease had ravaged her already diminished body. Wade brought medicine when he could, food and supplies the agents usually confiscated. He felt helpless and furious and heartbroken. But he didn't give up, and neither did Sokka. During their visit, she told him stories to keep his spirits up, taught him more Apache words, reminded him that they were still fighting just by continuing to exist. "We refuse to die," she said once. "That is our victory." Wade clung to that. On bad nights, when the loneliness threatened to drown him, he repeated it like a prayer. "We refuse to die. We refuse to let them win. We survive, and that is enough." And then in the 14th month, something changed. Wade arrived for his monthly visit to find Sokka looking different. Not healthier exactly, but more alert, more alive. She waited until the guard had stepped away, then leaned close and whispered, "I have found a way out, but I need your help." Wade's heart kicked into overdrive. What kind of help? "There is a woman here, white, married to an Apache man. She has connections outside. She says she can get me false papers, a new identity, but I need money, $200. It was a fortune, nearly everything Wade had saved, but he didn't hesitate. "I'll get it. When next visit, bring the money and bring civilian clothes, dark colors. She will have the papers ready and a contact who can take me across the border into Mexico." Sokka gripped his hand hard. "Wade, if this works, if I escape, you cannot come with me. Not at first. It would be too suspicious. You must stay here, act normal, act devastated when they discover I am gone. After a year, maybe 2, you can join me, but not before." 2 years, Wade said, trying to process it. After 14 months of separation, the thought of 2 more years was almost unbearable. But it was better than watching Sokka die slowly in San Carlos. It was better than giving up. "Can you do that?" Sokka asked. "Can you wait?" Wade looked into her eyes, those dark, fierce, beautiful eyes that had seen so much pain and still held hope, and knew there was only one answer. "I can wait," he said. "I'd wait forever for you." Sokka smiled, then really smiled for the first time in months. "Then we have a plan. 1 month from today, I will be free. And someday we will be together again, really together, without soldiers or supervision or fear." "Someday," Wade echoed and let himself believe it, let himself hope. The ride home that day felt different, lighter. Wade had spent over a year in a kind of purgatory, going through motions, existing but not living. Now suddenly there was a future again, a real tangible future where he and Sokka could be together without walls between them. 1 more month, 4 more weeks. Then Sokka would escape, disappear into Mexico, build a new life. And Wade would wait, work, the ranch, save money, maintain the fiction that he was a heartbroken husband whose wife had vanished. And when enough time had passed that it was safe, he'd follow her south. They'd find each other again, start over in a place where nobody knew their names or their history. It wasn't the life they'd planned, but it was a life. It was hope. And after everything they'd survived, the ravine, the bounty hunters, the cavalry, the separation, hope was revolutionary. Wade went home to his empty cabin that night, and for the first time in 14 months, slept soundly. He dreamed of desert stars and a woman's laughter, of a future where broken things stayed mended and love was enough to overcome any obstacle. He dreamed of Sokka free. And 4 weeks later, when he rode to San Carlos for his monthly visit and was told that his wife had vanished in the night, escaped somehow, despite the guards and the walls, Wade put on a performance worthy of the best actor. He raged and demanded answers and threatened lawsuits. He played the devastated husband perfectly. But inside his heart was singing, because Sokka was out there somewhere alive and free. And someday when the dust settled and the search died down, he'd find her again. They'd made too many promises to each other to let geography keep them apart. So Wade went back to his cabin and his work and his life. He endured the investigation and the suspicious looks and the whispered accusations. He waited through winter and spring and the scorching Arizona summer. He marked the days on a calendar, counting down to the moment when he could safely leave and follow the woman he loved into a new life. 2 years, Sokka had said. Wade would wait 2 years, 2 decades, 2 lifetimes if necessary, because some things were worth waiting for. Some people were worth any sacrifice. And Sokka, fierce, damaged, beautiful Sokka, who'd refused to die in a ravine and refused to break in a prison camp, was worth everything. Wade Holt had lost his first wife to fire and his second wife to circumstance. But he hadn't lost her forever. This was just an intermission, a pause in their story. The ending was still unwritten. And when he finally wrote it, it would be on his terms, in a place where they could wake up together every morning without fear, where the only law that mattered was the one they made together, where a cowboy and a warrior woman could finally just be Wade and Sokka, husband and wife, 2 survivors who'd earned their peace. That future was coming. Wade could feel it like dawn approaching after the longest night. So he worked and waited and held on to hope with both hands. Because hope was the only weapon that mattered. Hope and the absolute certainty that love, real tested, forged in fire love, could survive anything the world threw at it. Even separation, even time, even the vast distance between Arizona and Mexico and whatever life they'd build together on the other side of this long, dark valley. Wade believed it with every fiber of his being, and belief he was learning was the most powerful force of all.